The instructor lays out the ground rules. This wilderness survival test is supposed to be a total breeze. These elite freshmen just have to endure a single night out in the dark, sprawling woods. Instructors scattered weak beasts throughout the zone, handing every squad captain a glowing emergency parchment. Rip it, and a magical shield immediately pops up while signaling for backup. But there is one brutal catch. The second that paper tears, the entire squad gets instantly stripped of their elite status. Initially, the rookies brush the challenge off as an absolute walk in the park. Even Levin, the snobby aristocrat stuck in Oscar's squad, struts around boasting that he will single-handedly keep them safe. However, as the shadows grow longer, our boy's razor-sharp instincts scream danger long before the others even blink. An ominous rune flares to life under their boots, swallowing the entire crew in a blinding flash of spatial magic. Blinking away the glare, the group instantly realizes they're safe. They have been dumped straight into the 5th graveyard, a lethal hellscape, strictly reserved for advanced upperclassmen. Smelling a deadly setup, Oscar barks at the team to rip the flare and trigger the barrier. Instead, that absolute clown Levin shreds the artifact to pieces. He is desperate to use this nightmare as a stage to flex his skill. For a brief moment, the arrogant rich kid and his lackeys actually hold the line against a handful of monsters, relying on their flashy, coordinated attacks. Levin conjures up heavy barriers, while his followers rain down elemental blasts, grinning like they are putting on an epic masterclass. Then reality hits. A savage creature shatters their formation, lunging straight for Lily's throat, until Oscar intercepts. He instantly slices the roaring monster in half with a blazing... The true terror, however, wakes up at midnight. A colossal dragon crashes through the tree line, shattering whatever courage they had left. Levin, the loudmouth who promised safety. He instantly buries himself inside a solid rock shell like a coward, leaving the rest to die. Trapped, hopeless, with the massive reptile inhaling to unleash a hellish inferno, Oscar does not flinch. He steps right up to the beast. His eyes lock on to the glowing energy, swirling inside the monster's gaping jaw. Mimicking that raw power, he fuses it with his own combat logic, compressing pure magical force the exact same way a grandmaster The Titan exhales a tidal wave of fire, but our boy shoots back a singular, hyper-dense, flaming projectile that shreds right through the inferno. It blows the beast away in one deafening boom. Staring at the smoking carcass, the stunned elites finally understand. The peasant they ridiculed is an absolute monster. So rewind. How does a scrawny 14-year-old one-tap a dragon? In this universe, warriors are forced down two strict avenues. You either cast devastating spells as a sorcerer, or push your physical limits to the absolute brink as a blade wielder. In his original timeline, Oscar picked up the steel. He swung his weapon until his hands bled, ultimately clawing his way up to the mythical title of Sword Saint, the absolute peak of martial arts. Kings bowed to him, colossal demons fell to his strikes. He carved out a glorious legacy that mere mortals would kill. Yet beneath all the medals and fame, a bitter regret ate away at him. In his heart, he desperately craved the arcane arts, constantly wishing he had chosen the staff over the blade. His glorious run abruptly crashes when a shadow syndicate jumps him. They are led by a masked figure sporting a very specific necklace. Despite his god-tier strength, the Grandmaster finds himself cornered by their meticulously crafted lethal traps. Mid-battle, his helpless apprentice gets caught in the crossfire. This forces Oscar to tank fatal blows just to keep the kid breathing. Bleeding out on the cold dirt, his lifelong sorrow finally boils over. He understands that swinging a piece of metal was not enough. His absolute ignorance of spells is exactly what got them killed. But the universe throws him a massive lifeline. Instead of crossing into the afterlife, his soul violently snaps back into his teenage body. Gasping for air, his mind perfectly preserved, he desperately scans his surroundings. Panicking over his sudden survival, the familiar rustic cabins of his hometown quickly catch his eye. Sitting right on the table are two crisp, wax-sealed envelopes. His life-defining academy admissions. In this empire, the moment a kid hits 15 years of age, the state mails them dual acceptance papers, forcing a choice between the Sorcery Institute and the Knights College. Pick your path, hand in the ticket at the gates, and your destiny is locked in. Staring at those uncreased papers in his childhood home, the impossible truth smacks him right in the face. he has actually time traveled. He is exactly 14 again. And this time he has not picked up the sword yet. Out of nowhere, a bone-chilling presence looms right behind him, demanding to know why he's lurking out there all alone. Oscar whips around in pure shock. Staring back at him is his father, Brian. The impossible is real. He has actually leaped back in time. Brian immediately chews him out, barking that Oscar has gotten way too cocky lately and keeps slacking off on his training. But the old man is completely clueless. Oscar isn't being arrogant at all. In reality, he was agonizing over whether he should finally confess his burning passion for magic to his dad. You see, Brian is a renowned sword master with a whole squad of disciples under his wing, holding a rank that sits right beneath a sword saint and a sword emperor, proving the guy is an absolute beast with a blade. Being the son of such a legendary warrior, everyone naturally expected Oscar to walk the path of the sword. And for a while, that is exactly what happened. His old man showered him with praise every time his swordsmanship leveled up. Then came the day little Oscar sprinted home, eyes shining, to tell his dad about the mesmerizing magic he had just witnessed. But that was the exact moment his reality shattered. Brian snatched him up, snarling that magic was pathetic garbage for the weak, and forced him to stick to the blade. From then on, Oscar swung his weapon day after day, terrified of losing his father's approval. He remained chained to the steel even as his soul desperately craved the mystic arts. Ironically, a mage ended up taking his life in his past run. Now given a second chance, he refuses to compromise his true destiny. Brian growls the question again, demanding to know why he is skipping practice. Oscar just looks at him and drops a bombshell. He calmly states that he has already spent an entire lifetime mastering the blade. That answer sets Brian off. Pure rage erupts from his core, unleashing a colossal sword aura as glowing ethereal blades materialize all around him. The suffocating pressure instantly forces everyone nearby to their knees. Yet Oscar doesn't even flinch. He stands his ground perfectly composed against the crushing gravity. The groveling bystanders stare in disbelief. They can't fathom how Oscar is brushing off an aura that feels like it could snap their spines. Catching his son's unwavering gaze, Brian slowly dials back his energy, realizing the kid wasn't just spouting nonsense. He marches right up, gives Oscar a heavy pat on the shoulder, and proudly declares that if he keeps this up, he would happily hand over the entire guild to him one day. With that, the master walks off. Immediately, the three lackeys who tagged along swarm Oscar, mocking him. They smirk, claiming they couldn't wait to return from the academy, just to beat him up in a sparring match. One cocky jerk instantly volunteers to teach him a lesson. Oscar remembers these three losers well. They were his former training partners, the exact ones his dad always forced him to duel against. Back when these guys joined the academy and managed to unlock their sword aura, they started using Oscar as a punching bag, brutally venting all their past insecurities on him under the guise of teaching. And here they are, ready for round 2. Oscar casually picks up a wooden practice blade. The arrogant punk gets hyped, barking at him to get into position. It is a known fact that wielding aura creates an unfair advantage that raw technique simply cannot bridge. The trio is banking on that exact gap. But then Oscar pulls a wild card. He turns his back, strolls over to the edge of the lake, whispers a quiet thanks to his weapon, and casually chucks the blade straight into the water without a second thought. Watching the woods sink like a stone, the bullies burst into laughter, completely convinced that he is just chickening out. To them, tossing his weapon was the ultimate act of a coward. But the guy itching for a fight lunges at him anyway, screaming that Oscar is an absolute disgrace to the way of the sword. Oscar pivots back around, flashing a cold smile. He drops the bomb that he is officially done with swords forever. Why? Because he has finally chosen the path of a mage. The attacker couldn't care less. He sneers, promising no mercy just because his opponent is bare-handed. He slashes down with brutal force, but to Oscar, the guy is moving in slow motion. He easily tracks the aura-boosted speed and muscle power. Sadly for the bully, it is nowhere near enough. Oscar effortlessly sidesteps the fatal strike. Ready to dish out a brutal reality check, he tells the punk he needs to learn how to properly treat his blade. He tells the guy to treat the blade like a living, breathing extension of his own arm, not some cheap tool. But, shocker, that little slice of wisdom. Spitting pure rage, the guy shrieks at Oscar to shut his mouth, wildly slashing his sword through the air like a total maniac. Yet Oscar doesn't even flinch. It suddenly hits Oscar. He is totally treating this angry punk like one of his old disciples back in his past life. Total desperation sets in. The guy is practically tearing his hair out, screaming at the top of his lungs, because he can't even graze Oscar's clothes. Deciding playtime is over, Oscar puts the kid out of his misery. A simple, effortless shove to the forehead sends the loudmouth crashing. To seal the deal, Oscar drops a swift, precise strike right to his skull, knocking him out cold in the dirt. The defeated punk couldn't even stand on his own 2 feet, forcing his buddies to drag his limp body away. Once the peanut gallery clears out, Oscar's gaze locks onto the abandoned blade, now buried deep in the dirt. A dark memory flashes in his mind. He remembers the brutal moment his own father forced him to violently awaken his sword aura in his previous life. To make absolutely sure history doesn't repeat itself, Oscar realizes one massive truth. He needs to master magic first. Seeking total isolation, he vanishes into the dense, and his mind drifts back to an old conversation with Lily, a brilliant mage from his past life. He had asked her the million-dollar question: how does magic actually work? They harness and burn internal energy to supercharge their bodies and blades. But a mage's power, that was always a total mystery. Back then, Lily tapped her chin, brainstorming the absolute best way to break down something so incredibly complex. Grabbing a small watering can, she started gently sprinkling her blooming garden, explaining that casting a spell is just like nourishing thirsty plants with water. She revealed that mana might be totally invisible to the naked eye, but it is a living, breathing energy that floods the very air around us. By pulling that raw energy, pumping it through your mana circuits, and filtering it into a specific formula, boom, a magic spell is born. Lily's eyes used to sparkle when she talked about it. Fast forward to the present, Oscar sits completely motionless, soaking up that crucial memory. If mana is truly just like the oxygen he breathes, he figures that the second he actually senses it, he can suck it right into his own empty circuits. Here is the thing about veteran swordsmen. They push all 5 of their senses to the absolute limit just to survive the bloody battlefield. And while he might not hold the title of Sword Saint anymore, those razor-sharp instincts are permanently hardwired into his very soul. Banking on those killer instincts, Oscar closes his eyes, zeroing in on the unseen currents. A few seconds of pure, dead silence pass, until a breathtaking web of glowing purple threads suddenly illuminates the darkness. A massive grin spreads across his face, because he is actually doing it. He is seeing pure mana. Now step 2. Just drag that sweet energy right into his core. But then, reality hits him like a brick wall. He has absolutely no clue how to actually absorb this, because he totally forgot to ask Lily for the instruction. Jumping off the boulder in frustration, his sharp eyes suddenly catch a bizarre distortion deep in the woods, because the glowing mana in that specific direction is thick, heavy, and downright. Creeping toward the shadowy epicenter, a chill runs down his spine. The entire zone is completely dead, not a single bird or bug in sight. Boom. Something massive crashes down from the sky, forcing Oscar to dive for cover. As the thick dust clears, a giant, terrifying golem towers right over him. Oscar's heart races. What the heck is a literal war machine doing out here? Suddenly, a striking red-haired mage drops from the canopy, landing flawlessly on the metal giant's shoulder. And with a cold, piercing glare, she demands to know what the hell he is doing snooping around her The vibe instantly turns lethal. The golem's massive eyes glow a threatening crimson, shifting straight into kill mode as the mysterious mage presses him, accusing him of trying to steal her highly classified research. She warns him to choose his next words very, very carefully, because whatever comes out of his mouth will decide if he lives. Oscar locks eyes with the fiery mage, his mind racing. He knows that face. He has heard the terrifying battlefield legends. She is the brutal hero who absolutely dominated the frozen, blood-stained North. The legendary one-woman army who wiped out legions with her mechanical beast. The unstoppable force whose single golem rivaled an entire army of 1,000 men. Isabel, the mage of creation. Fast forward a few minutes, and things have gone completely south. Oscar is dragged deep into her hidden lair, his wrists tightly bound by while Isabel paces in front of him, launching a ruthless. He never in a million years imagined he would meet the northern legend tied to a chair. Leaning in close, she aggressively demands to know exactly which rival faction sent him. Still totally dizzy from the crazy ambush, Oscar just stammers. And that deer in the headlights look, yeah, it is only making Isabel even more. She ignites a glowing magic circle right beneath his feet, warning him to spill the truth or face the deadly consequences. Oscar shrieks in pure terror, begging Isabel to just calm down. He reminds her that he completely surrendered during his but that excuse only fuels her rage. Gripping her wand, she summons a blazing fireball, fully prepared to blast him into oblivion. She mocks him as some pathetic, nameless mage, prompting Oscar to scream at the top of his lungs that he hasn't even awakened as a wizard yet. That completely catches Isabel off guard. She freezes instantly, assuming the kid is just spinning a desperate lie. Snatching his head, she forcefully inspects his magic circuits, only to drop her jaw. He is actually telling the truth. There is absolutely zero mana flowing through his body. With the tension finally cleared, the two sit down for a drink. But Isabel makes one thing crystal clear. She is absolutely not apologizing. So he'd better scrub that ridiculous thought right out of his head. She vents about just kicking off her brand new role as an academy professor, yet she's already dealing with backstabbers at every turn. Oscar's eyes widen in absolute disbelief. This crazy woman is actually a teaching professor at the prestigious Magic Academy. Puffing out her chest, Isabel proudly brags about her shiny new title. Claiming the position is the perfect stepping stone to fund and advance her Suddenly, a light bulb goes off in Oscar's head. The ultimate golden ticket just dropped right into his lap. If he can somehow manage to become her student at the academy, he might actually figure out how to awaken the dormant mana inside his circuits, taking a massive leap of faith. Oscar practically begs Isabel to mentor him and unlock his hidden potential. Isabel shuts him down instantly. She coldly states that she has zero interest in babysitting someone's. She harshly orders him to chug the rest of his drink and get the hell out of her sight. But Oscar grits his teeth. There is no way he's letting this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Right at that moment, Isabel casually signals her mechanical servant for a refill, while Oscar frantically racks his brain for a way to change her mind. Out of nowhere, his eyes lock onto a bizarre, glitchy distortion radiating from the golem's right shoulder. He shoots up from his chair, urgently warning Isabel that her Isabel fiercely snaps back, accusing him of spouting absolute nonsense just to score some cheap attention. But before the words even leave her mouth, the malfunctioning golem dumps a whole pot of scalding tea directly onto her head. Oscar completely freaks out. He scrambles over to help her, knowing that liquid was boiling hot. Frantically asking if she's okay, he blurts out that the magic pathways jammed right near the machine's shoulder joint. Wiping her face, Isabel finally cools off enough to inspect the damage, and her jaw drops. He was spot on. Stunned, she demands to know how a talentless kid spotted a subtle mechanical glitch. Her curiosity instantly piques. She tightly grips his arm, interrogating him on his secret to spotting the broken part. He casually shrugs, explaining that the glowing energy flow simply looked unnatural and twisted to him. A massive realization suddenly hits Isabel like a freight train. Oscar can literally see raw mana floating in the naked air. Flashing back to the dark wizard who claimed energy was totally invisible, Oscar confirms the impossible. He actually sees it with his own two eyes. Isabel gasps in utter awe. Everything makes perfect sense now. This is exactly how he completely bypassed her complex security trap. Because her defenses rely entirely on manipulating unseen atmospheric energy, and to him, it was practically glowing in neon lights. Oscar's mind races. Could this bizarre vision be the rare hidden talent that evil wizard rambled about before brutally murdering him? After pondering for just a second, a sly smirk creeps onto Isabel's face. She formally declares that Oscar is totally floored. Literally 2 minutes ago, this woman was ready to kick him to the curb. She confidently clarifies her previous statement. She only hates weak, utterly useless men. But this crazy little stunt, He has officially captured her. With a firm handshake, the ultimate magical mentorship is officially sealed. Wasting zero time, she drags him straight into her private lecture hall, ordering 2 massive golems to prop up a giant chalkboard for her intense crash course. She kicks things off by explaining that just by breathing and staying alive, his body naturally soaks up raw ambient energy, which makes Oscar even more desperate to know how on earth does he force that power. To make it painfully simple, she uses a brilliant metaphor. You obviously can't pour a hot cup of tea without an actual cup to hold it, right? In the exact same way, raw energy absolutely refuses to flow until a solid magical formula acts as the vessel. With a dramatic flourish, she whips out a glowing magical scroll, loaded with a beginner's incantation. The exact same core spell she drills into all her first years. Oscar snatches up the scroll, his eyes wide with burning curiosity, as he grills Isabel about the exact type of magic hidden inside. Flashing a secretive smirk, Isabel keeps her lips completely sealed, teasing him that the big reveal is strictly reserved for the moment he actually pulls it off. She coaches him to truly feel the raw energy thrumming through his veins, urging him to visualize channeling that intense power straight into the ancient formula gripped. Challenging him with a sharp gaze, she asks if he is truly up for the task. Oscar, practically bouncing with excitement, eagerly declares he is absolutely. Secretly, Isabel harbors a massive reality check. Mastering this specific spell is a grueling grind that demands a bare minimum of 30 grueling days. Yet harboring high hopes for his immense potential, setting the mysterious parchment flat on the dirt, Oscar completely dials in, rigidly following Isabel's exact steps to awaken the dormant energy surging within his core. He immediately draws a brilliant parallel to refining his razor-sharp sword aura, realizing he merely has to shift his absolute focus deep into his own soul. Shutting his eyes tight, he commands the raging mana to course through his limbs aggressively, funneling the mystical current straight into the waiting diagram. Right on cue, the injected mana violently jumpstarts the dormant sigils, erupting into a blinding, magnificent flash of pure light. Fundamentally mastering mana mirrors, desperately trying to stand on freshly sprouted legs. Absolutely nobody enters this world already sprinting. You are guaranteed to violently faceplant countless times. It requires brutally enduring the learning curve of your own physical limits before you can finally rise up and stand tall on your own 2 feet. Watching Oscar completely obliterate her ultimate test in mere minutes, she immediately turns to stone, completely paralyzed. Legends always claim that the absolute elite titans of the magical realm grasp mana control far quicker than mere mortals, but conquering it on literally attempt number 1, unthinkable. She desperately questions if his insane ability to physically see atmospheric mana gave him a cheat code. She violently discards that theory a second later. Sight alone absolutely cannot justify the sheer miracle that just unfolded. Yet she is forced to swallow the terrifying reality. The kid casually standing before her is a monstrous, once-in-a-generation prodigy. Snapping out of it, Isabel sprints over, enthusiastically slapping his back as she heavily praises his unbelievable first-try activation of the comp. Without warning, Oscar's beaming smile instantly drops dead. Staring blankly, he bluntly mutters that his phenomenal feat just. Isabel tilts her head in utter confusion, only for Oscar to boldly claim that his newly cast spell severely lacked. Flashing back to the spellbinding magic he witnessed as a tiny child, he passionately rants about how flawlessly gorgeous that memory remains compared to his current sloppy execution. Angrily jabbing a finger at the written formula, he insists it is fundamentally flawed. He blatantly warns Isabel that exactly like that clunky golem's shoulder from earlier, the entire structure feels incredibly wrong. Pivoting sharply toward Isabel, he demands to know her honest, unfiltered opinion on the messy diagram. But Isabel is so intensely short-circuited by his insane critique. Staring into the distance, Oscar firmly declares that an absolute, crystal-clear epiphany just hit him like a truck. He absolutely refuses to be just another average spellcaster. His ultimate destiny is to evolve into a legendary. A wild, fanatic fire ignites in his eyes as he speaks. Recovering slightly, Isabel sarcastically suggests he should have simply reconstructed the entire damn formula himself, if he genuinely believed the ancient script was heavily flawed. Taking that literally, Oscar instantly charges at Isabel, desperately begging to learn the sacred art of drafting magical circles. Later on, Brian is casually strolling through the massive estate when he spots Oscar's elite squad, groaning completely sprawled out and battered on the floor. Stepping closer with narrowed eyes, the intimidating man demands a full explanation for this utter. The beaten trio massively panics, desperately scrambling to dodge the heavy question. But Brian does not back down an inch, coldly pressing them for the gritty details of their. Finally cracking under the immense pressure, the battered squad nervously admits that Oscar utterly demolished their combined forces. Finding this absurdly impossible to digest, Brian simply turns his back, barking orders at them to patch up their bloody wounds, so they do not dare ruin tomorrow's rigorous training schedule. But entirely hidden from their view, a wildly proud smirk stretches across Brian's hardened face. He silently realizes the perfect moment has finally arrived to violently awake. Cutting back to Oscar, he is aggressively burying himself in Isabel's intense, magical curriculum. The sheer terrifying mountain of absolute theory required to wield genuine magic leaves his brain entirely. Glancing over his progress, Isabel casually drops a massive compliment. Smiling warmly, she generously offers to completely open her private, forbidden library if he is truly hungry for more heavy reading. Oscar's jaw drops. Trembling with sheer nerve, smirking confidently, she fiercely nods. She proudly brags that every single drop of her legendary high-tier magical intellect is physically trapped within those dusty pages, granting him absolute, unfiltered permission to haul away as many massive tomes as his arms can physically carry. That reckless generosity backfires in literally 2 seconds. Oscar ruthlessly raids the shelves, mercilessly hoarding nearly every single rare grimoire. Panicking Isabel wildly tries to defend her precious stash, but the smug kid brutally hits her with her own words, reminding her she literally gave him a Suddenly, the playful mood instantly shatters. Isabel's face turns dead serious as she chillingly warns Oscar that there is one extremely dark, hidden truth he absolutely. Now that mana is actually surging through his circuits, and he is officially a mage, he needs to be extremely careful with how he handles sword energy. One wrong move, and it is game over. Back in his previous life, Oscar, while his dad was lying on his deathbed fading fast, the old man motioned for him to come closer. With his final breaths, he whispered that he could finally see it. Oscar possessed a genuine gift for magic. Right then and there, Brian confessed his biggest regret. Forcing his boy to abandon the mystic arts was a massive mistake. But in this timeline, things are going to be different. Oscar is fully prepared to march right up to his dad and demand. Later that evening, Oscar tracks down the old man, clutching that fateful envelope tightly in his grip. Brian gruffly asks what he wants, and the young man gets straight to the point. He needs authorization on his enrollment papers. Snatching the parchment, the swordmaster fully expected to see the Knights Institute, but his eyes locked onto the Sorcery Academy crest instead. Flashing a confident smirk, Oscar reminds his old man that he cannot officially register as a mage without parental consent. Brian rubs his temples in absolute disbelief. He furiously demands why the hell his own flesh and blood, the heir to a legendary blade master, would choose some cheap parlor tricks. Unfazed, the boy simply asks if his dad remembers that conversation from years ago, when he first declared his dream of casting spells. Brian violently slams the document onto the floor, snapping that those fantasies were just stupid, childish delusions. Reaching out, the veteran grabs his kid, attempting to forcefully inject sword aura right into his veins. But a sudden shockwave. Stumbling backward, Brian gasps in pure shock, demanding to know if his son actually awakened a mana core. Shrugging it off, Oscar admits he went ahead and did it in secret, because there was absolutely no other way. Hearing this, Brian absolutely loses his mind. His blood boils as he brings up the rumors of Oscar absolutely wrecking his older siblings in combat. He screams that destroying a trained fighter without using a single ounce of sword energy proves he is a once-in-a-generation prodigy. Oscar calmly replies that he already knows how gifted he is, but his furious dad cuts him off, roaring that he clearly has no clue. Pacing like a caged animal, Brian yells that endless glory and absolute power are practically handed to him if he just picks up a blade. The young mage nods in agreement, but drops a cold, hard truth. Hitting the top does not mean a damn thing if you are miserable doing it. Ripping at his hair in total exasperation, the swordmaster's last thread of sanity finally snaps. A dark thought crosses his mind. If he acts right now, he can still beat this magical nonsense out of his kid's system. He glares daggers at his boy, growling that he refuses to let his bloodline walk down a path of ruin, and he will gladly shatter some bones to knock some sense into him. The deadly metallic shing of a blade echoes through the room. Brian points his weapon at Oscar, muttering that the kid might hate him for this right now, but he guarantees that one day he will get down on his knees and thank him. Hearing this, Oscar lets out a bitter, silent chuckle, because he remembers the first timeline perfectly. That day of gratitude never arrived, and forcing himself to wield a sword is exactly what got him killed. The angry veteran barks at his son to draw his weapon. Instead, Oscar takes a deep, steadying breath and casually tosses the knight. As the paper turns to ash, he looks his dad dead in the eye, and he completely disrespects the old man's authority, taunting him to step up and see if he can actually punch the magic right out of his soul. Infuriated by the sheer disrespect, Brian decides to show no mercy. He figures the brat is just riding a massive ego trip after surviving one tiny burst of aura. Exploding forward like a cannonball, the master unleashes a devastating bone-crushing swing. But Oscar casually sidesteps. Brian's jaw practically hits the floor. It is like staring into a mirror. The kid is reading his every microscopic muscle movement like refusing to back down. The veteran unleashes a terrifying flurry of silver steel. But his son dances through the lethal hurricane without taking a single scratch. It is almost unfair. In his previous life, he had mirrored his father's combat style to absolute perfection, making predicting these strikes laughably easy. Breathing heavily, Brian finally pauses his relentless assault. Gripping his hilt, he admits that the kid definitely is not bluffing about his skills. He openly praises his son's monstrous reflexes, acknowledging that slipping past a barrage of lethal cuts without using aura to boost his physical speed is straight up insane. Looking at him with a mix of pride and frustration, the old master declares that not a single elite knight in their entire guild could pull off a stunt like that. He passionately begs his boy to realize his god-tier potential with the blade, claiming he is ready to stake the family's entire leg. To prove he is dead serious, Brian unleashes a suffocating wave of golden aura, demanding Oscar surrender to the path of the sword right this second. But the young mage just smirks, firing back that the old man was supposed to be violently beating the magic out of his system. Flashing a cocky grin, Oscar taunts his furious dad, asking if he is resorting to begging simply because he cannot actually land a hit on him. That disrespectful jab hits right where it hurts. Oscar does not stop there, declaring that if raw talent is the only thing that matters in this household, then he has his own ambitions that he refuses to bury. With a slick flick of his wrist, the boy draws his magical wand, causing his veteran father to let out a mock. Glaring at the tiny piece of wood, Brian sneers, asking if he's. Oscar boldly declares to his old man that the wooden stick in his grip is actually a wand, even if it is just a basic beginner's tool. Sure, the kid barely knows a single spell yet, but he wagers his dad is totally clueless about magic too. That gives him the ultimate element of surprise if Oscar doesn't even know his next move. How could the swordmaster possibly predict it? Brian explodes forward, blurring into a sudden sprint to slip right into the boy's blind spot. Yet just as the strike descends, the kid reacts with lightning speed, dodging the blow and leaving his old man completely exposed. Without missing a beat, Oscar shoves the tip of his wand straight into, channeling the very first spell he ever witnessed, the exact same one that has haunted his dreams for years. He finally takes his shot. It is just a simple spark, but fueled by sheer, unyielding desperation. The boy actually makes it happen. A blinding flash erupts right between Brian's eyes, momentarily scorching his vision. Seizing that split second of blindness, the boy slides around to his father's back, forcing the veteran to spin on pure instinct. Brian assumes the flashbang was just a cheap diversion for a direct strike. Instead, Oscar outplays him entirely, wrapping around his blind side to smack the blade right out of his grip, leaving the great swordmaster utterly disarmed. Letting out an exasperated groan, Brian demands to know if snatching the weapon was the kid's master plan, right from the jump. With a smirk, the boy fires back, reminding his dad that burying your true target underneath a pile of fakes is exactly what he taught him. Brian levels with him, insisting he can vouch for his son's ridiculous talent with a blade. But who out there is going to promise he has a shred of magical potential? Looking him dead in the eye, Oscar simply states that he just laid out the exact path he is destined to carve out for himself. He drops a heavy question. Did Brian only pick up a blade because someone else validated his skills? That single sentence strikes the veteran like a physical blow. A sudden flashback hits him, throwing him back to a cozy chat with Oscar's mom when she was still heavily pregnant. He was rambling about molding their unborn boy into a sword prodigy, while she gently teased him that he only picked up a blade because he thought it looked insanely badass, and that they had absolutely no right to dictate their kid's future. She firmly believed their son had to forge his own destiny. Snapping back to reality, a warm smile creeps onto the old man's face as he confesses his selfish hope, admitting he truly believed the boy was destined to become a legendary sword saint. He slowly strides over to where the discarded Magic Academy form lies in the dirt, making Oscar's heart drop as he braces for his dad to rip it to shreds. Against all odds, the old man flips the script, declaring he is fully prepared to sign the damn paperwork. Cutting over to the Elite Academy, the faculty is huddled up reviewing the incoming roster, and every single professor agrees on one terrifying fact. This year's batch of rookies is insanely overpowered. Lurking in the shadows is an incredibly sketchy instructor rocking the exact same bizarre pendant as the psychopath who murdered Oscar in his past life. And even he confesses that these freshmen are absolute monsters. Back at the estate, our boy is grinding his life away, burying his face in towering stacks of spellbooks. Fast forward 6 months. The big day is finally here. Bags packed for the academy. Oscar meets his dad out in the courtyard for a final farewell. The veteran drops some heavy wisdom, warning him that just like his endless sword training, there are freaks out there who have spent their entire lives perfecting their mana. He admits he has no right to lecture a mage, but begs his son to fiercely defend the path he fought so hard to walk. Flashing a confident grin, Oscar swears he will be perfectly fine, pointing out a brutally honest fact. There is not a single soul on that campus who is more terrifying than his own dad. Hearing that cheeky comeback, the grizzled warrior finally cracks a smile and exhales a deep breath of relief. Wrapping up their wholesome send-off, the kid spins on his heels and hits the road. A massive, unshakable grin stretches across his face, hyped beyond belief that he is actually stepping foot into the magical institution of his wildest dreams. Moments later, he steps through the towering gates of the Imperial Kirk Academy, and his jaw practically hits the floor at the sheer scale of the place. You have got wizards zooming through the skies on broomsticks, and tiny mechanical dolls marching around, blasting out live instrumental beats. He is utterly paralyzed by the spectacle this chaotic wonderland is light years away from the rigid, blood and sweat vibe of the Sword Academy. He crouches down to inspect the tiny figures, racking his brain to figure out their core mechanics, since they give off major golem energy. Right as he gets lost in the magical engineering, a familiar voice cuts through the noise. Isabel materializes behind him, warning the boy he is about his freshman orientation if he keeps geeking out over some magical toys. Leaping to his feet, the kid lights up with pure joy at the sight of his master, prompting the elegant mage to raise an eyebrow and ask if he has been slacking on his arcane grind while she was out of the picture. Smirking with pride, Oscar boasts that his skills have skyrocketed compared to where he stood 6 months ago. Flashing a knowing look, Isabel challenges him to blow her mind once again, eagerly anticipating his next trick. Gesturing toward a massive crowd in the distance, she reveals that the brutal selection trials for the first class are kicking off right now. When our boy asks for the rundown, she explains that freshmen typically get split into 2 basic tiers, depending entirely on their mana capacity. But sitting at the absolute top of the food chain is an exclusive tier reserved only for the most insanely gifted prodigies, the legendary first class. Isabel breaks it down, calling the trial a ruthless filter, designed to weed out the weak. Even so, she seriously warns him to steer clear of the testing grounds, leaving Oscar completely puzzled by her hesitation. Dropping her voice, she reveals that the kids who survived this cut are absolute freaks of nature. We are talking about purebred elites who have been breathing and weaponizing magic. Instead of backing down, a massive grin spreads across Oscar's face, thrilled at the prospect of unlocking some hardcore advanced spells. Isabel dramatically facepalms, instantly realizing that talking sense into this adrenaline junkie is a completely lost cause. Throwing her hands up, she finally caves and tells him to go check out the madness for himself. Without missing a beat, our protagonist strolls straight toward the chaotic testing arena. Arriving at the scene, he watches a competitor blast a barrage of floating targets out of the sky using a series of spells. It immediately clicks in his head. This whole trial boils down to magical accuracy and raw fire. Yet a heavy, uncomfortable vibe washes over him as he catches the crowd glaring at him, right before an arrogant, white-haired aristocrat steps into his personal space. Meet Zazan Guillotine, a stuck-up brat who immediately barks that a lowly peasant has absolutely zero right to breathe the same air as them at these trials. Ordering him to get lost, Zazan is met with serious pushback when Oscar fires back, stating that the academy supposedly gives every student a fair shot. Zazan just sneers, mocking the rookie for having such a loud mouth, which makes Isabel's earlier warning suddenly ring crystal clear in Oscar's head. He witnesses the ugly truth firsthand. If you lack a fancy bloodline, you get treated like shoving our hero out of the way. The snobby noble claims the next turn, ordering the peasant to shut his mouth and witness true greatness. Up at the front, Professor Ruth activates the arena and locks in the blistering test parameters. Flexing his ego, Zazan brags that the first class belongs exclusively to prodigies who have bled for their craft since childhood. He promises to give Oscar a front-row seat to the crushing gap between their power levels. In a flash, Zazan unleashes a devastating blizzard of ice magic, instantly encasing every single target in frost and leaving the entire audience gasping for air. The crowd goes absolutely wild, aggressively glazing the boy and hyping up the terrifying influence of the guillotine bloodline. Whispers echo through the arena, with fanboys convinced that the icy prodigy is still holding back his real, terrifying potential. Soaking in the deafening applause, Zazan struts right back over to our protagonist with a massive smirk on his face. He taunts the rookie, claiming the peasant must finally realize that pathetic weaklings like him simply do not belong in this elite world. Oscar keeps his cool, genuinely complimenting the spell work and admitting it is refreshing to see the results of lifelong dedication. But then with zero hesitation, he casually roasts Zazan, calling that entire flashy display a massive waste of energy, sending a shockwave of disbelief right across. Having shed actual blood, sweat, and tears for his own strength, Oscar effortlessly brushes past the stunned aristocrat. To be completely honest, our hero had been sweating bullets about whether he could actually clear this insane hurdle. But after seeing the supposed peak of noble talent, he mentally thanks the arrogant rich kid for handing him a massive boost of confidence. Stepping up to the plate, Oscar unsheathes his basic starter wand, instantly sparking a tidal wave of brutal mockery from the sidelines. The haters laugh, relentlessly convinced that landing even a single shot with such garbage gear. Meanwhile, Zazan is secretly spiraling, deeply rattled by the rookie's savage critique of his supposedly flawless technique. He starts frantically replaying his own spell in his head, entirely unable to accept that his absolute zero magic could have a single blind spot. Shaking his head, the snobby noble buries his doubts, convincing himself that a superior being like him should never sweat the opinions of absolute trash. Back at the professor's booth, Ruth is still completely blown away by that incredible frosty display. It finally hits her exactly why the entire faculty has been hyping up this year's batch of absolute monsters. In her mind, the icy prodigy has practically secured the coveted title of freshman representative already. Suddenly, snapping back to reality, she notices our boy just standing there, like a statue, leaving her totally confused about his game plan. The toxic crowd is already ripping him to shreds, loudly booing the rookie and screaming at him to pack his bags and go home. Ruth quickly catches on that Oscar is just biding his time, completely devoid of any nervous sweat or panic, or any hint of impatience. The blistering projectile erupts at breakneck speed, instantly piercing through every single dummy in one fluid, devastating motion. The shattered targets immediately collapse into dust, leaving Ruth standing there with her jaw cracked. The strike was so blindingly fast that the clueless crowd of students barely registered a blink, leaving them utterly bewildered about what just happened. Even with Oscar flawlessly obliterating all 5 marks, the jealous crowd simply refuses to give him an ounce of credit. Pointing at the pinpoint scorch marks, they fiercely mock him, swearing up and down that such a pathetic display means an automatic fail. Sazan literally turns his back in sheer disappointment, scoffing, because he fully expected some earth-shattering, apocalyptic explosion. Unbothered, Oscar glances at Ruth and casually asks if he flunked. Without missing a beat, she firmly declares he passed with flying colors for nailing all 5 targets. Puzzled, Ruth presses him on why he didn't just blast them individually, clearly knowing he possessed the raw power to do so. Refusing to believe it was just dumb luck, she listens as Oscar admits Sazan's flashy spellwork was genuinely a sight to behold. However, he coldly points out that burning through that massive amount of mana was nothing but a reckless, foolish waste. Ruth gasps, completely stunned by his blunt critique. Oscar calmly breaks it down, stating that practical exams are meant to mirror reality, specifically life-or-death survival scenarios against bloodthirsty. Because of this, he prioritized strictly rationing his energy reserves for a prolonged war zone, an incredibly mature mindset that absolutely shatters Ruth's expectations. Snapping out of her daze, she hastily apologizes for holding him up and officially dismisses him from the testing grounds. Watching his retreating back, Ruth shivers in pure admiration. The kid possessed the freakish tactical vision to predict the chaotic flight paths of the targets, not to mention the sheer ice-cold nerve to stand perfectly still and wait for the ultimate opening. On top of all that terrifying instinct, his mana control was surgically precise, hitting the bullseye without wasting a single. She internally notes that while his spell choice wasn't visually stunning or incredibly complex, stripped of the bells and whistles, all she sees walking away is a monstrous, once-in-a-generation prodigy. Meanwhile, Oscar is secretly marveling at just how insanely impressive Ruth's magic actually was. Because pulling the strings to make several targets swerve, suddenly a chilling sensation crawls up Oscar's spine. His eyes narrow, and he aggressively barks at the hidden stalker to reveal themselves. A raspy voice echoes from the shadows, praising the boy's sharp instincts. In a blink, a mysterious old man materializes, floating right above him. With a gentle smile, the stranger formally introduces himself as Balsamos, the esteemed headmaster governing the entire. Panic flashes in Oscar's eyes as he drops into a deep, respectful bow, desperately apologizing for snapping at the top brass. Chuckling warmly, Balsamos waves off the apology, confessing that lurking in the shadows like a creep was entirely his own fault. But as Oscar straightens up, his gaze locks onto a bizarre, glowing pendant dangling from the headmaster's neck, sparking an instant flash of recognition. Catching that split-second stiffening of the boy's posture, Balsamos tilts his head curiously, asking if something is bothering him. Extending a wrinkled hand downward, the old wizard warmly invites the young student for a proper, formal handshake. Oscar hesitantly reaches out, but a fraction of a second before their skin touches, a lethal spike of bloodlust surges straight from the ground beneath him. Relying purely on survival instinct, he violently kicks off the dirt, launching himself. Balsamos claps in genuine delight, thoroughly impressed by the kid's terrifyingly sharp spatial awareness. Hovering higher to secure the absolute high ground, Balsamos smirks, while a sweating Oscar screams out asking if this is an assassination attempt. Gripping his magical wand tightly, the boy drops into a desperate, do-or-die Balsamos bursts into laughter, mockingly asking if Oscar seriously plans to slay a titan with that pathetic bite-sized twig. Without warning, the headmaster conjures a suffocating, violent cyclone that instantly cages Oscar in. The boy grinds his teeth, knowing evasion is mathematically impossible. But instead of screaming or hopelessly bashing against the wind wall, he fully commits to a desperate counterattack, blasting a blistering stream of fire straight at the old man's face. This insane gamble forces the headmaster to drop his wind cage purely so he can conjure a. Utterly stunned by the sheer tactical genius of that exact angle of attack, Balsamos completely shatters his own defensive barriers. With the crushing pressure finally gone, Oscar completely collapses onto his head. Floating gracefully down to the dirt, Balsamos teases him about running empty on mana, casually mentioning that the boy would be a corpse right now if this wasn't just a friendly little pop quiz. Oscar lets out a ragged, exhausted sigh, demanding to know the headmaster's true agenda, because there is no way he orchestrated a near-death trial, just for a few cheap laughs. Grinning ear to ear, Balsamos applauds the kid's razor-sharp intuition, and finally begins to explain a massive chunk of the Academy's elite actually view magic as their own exclusive, untouchable birthright. Balsamos admits he threw Oscar into the fire, just so the kid could taste that harsh reality firsthand. But watching the absolute chaos unfold, the headmaster realizes he vastly underestimated the sheer depth of Oscar's hidden potential. The terrifying truth finally clicks in Oscar's head. If he shines too brightly, a massive target will be painted right on his back, triggering the exact same brutal ambush he just... Nodding grimly, Balsamos confirms his darkest fears. He exposes a shadowy group of radical elites who absolutely refuse. A chilling flashback hits Oscar, the exact cold words spat by the mages who murdered him in his past life. They claimed his overwhelming brilliance was a terrifying threat they simply couldn't. Desperate for answers, Oscar demands names. Balsamos just lets out a heavy, exhausted sigh before warning the boy that digging up those identities would only fast-track his funeral, urging him to focus solely on forging enough raw power to survive the Academy's brutal halls. The gravity of those words slams into him. If this headmaster actually wanted him dead, he'd already be a corpse. Shifting gears, Oscar points out the mysterious glowing pendant resting on Balsamos's chest. The old man casually drops a bombshell. That artifact is the Oscar's jaw practically hits the floor. A magic saint. That's the absolute pinnacle of arcane mastery. Before Oscar can process it all, Balsamos tosses him a sleek metal badge, firmly ordering him to guard it with his life, claiming it'll be his saving grace in the near future. Watching the headmaster retreat, Oscar finally senses the monstrous, suffocating aura rolling off the man. His mana is so terrifyingly perfect, not a single ripple disturbs its surface. But reality quickly snaps Oscar out of his awe. He doesn't have the luxury of just standing around fanboying. He used to think just scraping by with magic would be enough. But knowing a literal magic saint orchestrated his previous murder, it basically guarantees those same shadow assassins are coming for his neck in this second life too. With his back against the wall, Oscar's resolve hardens into absolute steel. He must shatter his own limits. Fast forward to Classroom 1. The arrogant Zazen catches some frantic whispers bouncing around about Oscar, and the blazing rumor that a filthy commoner, Zazen completely loses it, barking that the trashy peasant is just a fluke who'll be crushed and expelled in no time. But before the smug jerk can even finish his rant, the heavy classroom doors swing wide open. Oscar steps in, sending massive shockwaves through Zazen and every other snob who bet against. Flashback to right after his chat with Balsamos. Oscar had locked himself in his dorm, grinding relentlessly to force his mana circuits to devour more energy. Hour by agonizing hour, he felt his stamina stretching, pushing way past his old breaking points. His blood is pumping so hot, he's practically begging for a real brutal fight to test these new limits. Now basking in the glaring stares of the elite class, an unfamiliar primal hunger roars awake inside him, a desperate craving for absolute power. Their eyes lock across the room. Zazen's face twists into pure, unfiltered disgust. Oscar just smirks inwardly. He totally expected this pompous brat to be stinking up the top class. But sweeping his gaze to the back row, a soft, familiar aura catches his attention. It's Lily. He smoothly closes the distance, bending down to rescue a delicate bookmark she'd just dropped. Flashing that signature dazzling smile, Lily gently takes it back, thanking him with a warm giggle. Catching a glimpse of the pressed petal, Oscar accidentally blurts out a comment about her deep obsession with flowers. She tilts her head, totally confused by how he knew that. Panicking internally, Oscar scrambles to cover it, smoothly pivoting to claim he was just admiring the gorgeous design, before formally he politely asks to claim the empty seat beside her, and her face absolutely lights up with joy, beaming brightly as she officially introduces herself as Lily Lowell. Out of nowhere, a sharp, unfamiliar voice slices through the noisy chatter, commanding the attention of the entire packed hall. Every single student jolts out of their seat, craning their necks to see what fresh chaos is about to kick off. Out of nowhere, a familiar figure materializes at the front of the room. It's Ruth, the very same professor who oversaw their grueling entrance exams. She proudly announces that she will be spearheading the elite first class. Oscar's jaw practically hits the floor, completely blindsided that this powerhouse instructor is leading their group. But but she quickly drops the exact bombshell he's been dying for. Starting next week, they are diving headfirst into live combat, drills against real monsters. The professor reveals they are heading out for brutal field training, and the second those words echo through the hall, a massive grin spreads across Oscar's face. He is finally getting the hardcore battle experience he craves. Ruth continues explaining that, to keep everything perfectly balanced on the battlefield, the Academy will divide them into tight-knit squads of 5. Whispers immediately erupt as the rookies debate how they will measure their raw power. Ruth silences them, declaring they will gauge, and this based on their core mana circuits. In plain English, they are testing the absolute magical energy each student can handle. A random kid raises his hand, questioning how exactly she intends to pull this off, but Ruth just flashes a sly grin, revealing she already finished the scan. In a flash, glowing orbs materialize above every single student. The professor notes that the blinding brightness of their personal halo directly represents their ultimate mana reserves. A vast majority proving this elite squad is absolutely packed with top-tier prodigies. Her gaze drifts over to Oscar, only to find his tiny energy sphere flickering weakly, looking like a dying candle next to a raging bonfire. The arrogant elites instantly tear into him, brutally mocking his pathetic glow, and branding him utter garbage, simply because he lacks noble blood. Everyone automatically assumes the commoner is doomed to fight entirely alone. Yet Oscar, completely unbothered, brushes off the toxic whispers. Suddenly, Lily gently taps his shoulder, warmly inviting him to team up with her crew, and a stunned Oscar questions if she is genuinely serious about recruiting the lowest-ranked guy in the room. She nods enthusiastically, insisting that anyone with a deep appreciation for flowers naturally has a pure heart. But she admits she still needs to get the final green light from their squad captain, Levin Aldrich. This fiery-haired aristocrat scans the commoner up and down before casually approving his entry into their ranks, pompously declaring that a true blue blood must always shield the pathetic and powerful. Levin smirks, assigning Oscar the glorious role of their personal luggage carrier. A few minutes pass, and Lily catches the rich kids glaring at Oscar like he's downright contagious. She quickly nudges him, begging him to ignore their nasty attitudes. She points out that highborn kids are practically bottle-fed magic spells from birth, making this massive power gap completely normal. Oscar flashes an easygoing smile, swearing he is perfectly fine, and simply thrilled to be rolling with their squad, which prompts Lily to lean in and ask exactly how long he has been studying the magical art. Her brain practically short-circuits when the rookie casually drops that he only started learning a mere half a year ago. She freezes, gasping for air in pure disbelief, leaving Oscar totally bewildered by her dramatic reaction. Once the lecture wraps up, Zazen marches straight up to the professor's desk. Ruth questions his grim expression, and he immediately demands to know why a filthy peasant is polluting. He rants that the kid cannot even cast a basic spell without struggling, holding an absolute garbage mana pool that guarantees a pathetic amateur like him will get slaughtered trying to keep pace with the top-tier prodigies. Hearing this arrogant tirade, Ruth just smirks and drops an absolute bombshell. She casually reveals the rookie picked up a spellbook for the very first time just half a year prior. The absolute second this registers in Zazen's brain, his eyes snap wide open in sheer paralysis. The instructor confidently brags about the commoner's terrifying hidden potential, warning the snob that within a few short months, the supposed trash might just be the exact one looking down on everyone else. She struts away, throwing over her shoulder that weeding out the weaklings is exactly why they do live fire exercises, so he should stop sweating the small stuff. Meanwhile, Lily is caught up giving Oscar a crash course on the ultimate magical hierarchy. She breaks down the power scale, rising from Magic Apprentice to Magic Adept, up to Magic Tier, reaching Magic Sovereign, and finally, the legendary Magic Saint. She clarifies that, thanks to their hardcore childhood training, nearly every aristocrat walking these halls easily rocks the Magic Adept rank or higher. Oscar mentally connects the dots, knowing full well that adepts are the baseline warriors drafted for genuine monster hunting. If this is purely based on raw energy, he genuinely respects these rich kids for hitting such a lethal milestone at their young age. yet. Lily furiously shakes her head, insisting that he is the actual freak of nature here, because hitting the magic apprentice rank in just half a year is what's truly mind-blowing. Hitting this insane tier in a mere 6 months, that is completely... This mind-blowing progress actually has Oscar questioning if he possesses some hidden monstrous talent, but he stubbornly refuses to accept his own overpowered nature, tossing all the credit straight to his master's training. Curious, Oscar pulls Lily aside to dig into her actual connection with the arrogant Levin. She spills the tea, explaining that Levin hails from a massively influential ancient noble bloodline. Lesser houses practically grovel to them for military backing, making Oscar instantly realize that Lily's clan is stuck under their thumb. Lily admits that while the guy acts like a total jerk, she swears to Oscar that Levin will actually step up and shield them when things get rough. Honestly, though, Oscar could not care less about playing the damsel in distress. All he craves is the raw, gritty combat experience. Fast forward to field training week, and the entire freshman class is huddled at the drop zone. Ruth swaggers in alongside a battle-scarred, eye-patched professor to break down the rules of engagement. She briefs the rookies, revealing that a horde of low-tier beasts has been unleashed across the woods. Their one and only mission: survive the harsh wilderness. She points out the enchanted scrolls handed to every squad captain, loaded with a heavy-duty force field and a blinding distress flare. Her orders are crystal clear: tear the scroll the second a lethal threat appears. Smirks ripple through the crowd. These sheltered kids genuinely think this trial will be an absolute breeze, but Ruth shatters their confidence, dropping a brutal ultimatum. Any squad that pops their flare gets instantly kicked out of the elite first class. Instantly, the smug grins vanish from the courtyard. Watching the sudden wave of dread, Oscar connects the dots. Maintaining that top-tier status is a massive deal for these prideful aristocrats. Pumping out pure arrogance, Levin gloats to his squad that failure is literally impossible with him in charge. He promises to carry them to victory, then immediately tosses a crushing mountain of gear right into Oscar's arms. Lily anxiously tries to intervene over the ridiculous weight, but Oscar waves her off. A deal is a deal. As our boy effortlessly hauls the massive packs, Levin chuckles maliciously, praising the commoner for knowing his place at the bottom. He even tosses in a sharp warning, demanding Oscar better not drag the team down. Cut to a few miles deeper into the woods, and this same loudmouth noble is gasping for air, absolutely drenched in sweat. Of course, he blames the rugged dirt paths. When Oscar calmly offers a helping hand, Levin violently smacks it away, his fragile ego bruised. Shaking off the cringeworthy tantrum, the squad marches forward. Oscar quickly realizes the woods are dead silent, not a single beast in sight, proving the academy keeps the zone on a tight leash. Suddenly, a chilling spike in mana floods Oscar's senses. He barks at Levin to freeze immediately, but the snobby noble snaps right back, furious that a peasant dares to command him, and stomps forward like a stubborn brat. His heavy boots land dead center on a hidden spatial rune, triggering a blinding flash. Reality literally fractures around them, sending the entire team into sheer panic mode. Levin starts screaming for his mother, but our icy protagonist doesn't even flinch, commanding the squad to draw their weapons, because they are being violently sucked into the spatial rift. The blinding light fades, and Lily scans the eerie, unfamiliar canopy towering above them. Pure terror washes over her face. They are standing right inside the notorious Fifth. Gasping in horror, the crew realizes they just dropped into an extreme danger zone, strictly locked down for the senior class. One teammate starts hyperventilating, begging to know how a bunch of fragile first-years ended up in hell. Oscar's eyes narrow. This was no accident, a targeted spatial trap. He immediately suspects the shadowy syndicate, the exact same assassins who brutally slaughtered him in his... Treating this as a code-red survival scenario, Oscar calmly orders them to rip the distress scroll. But Levin, clinging desperately to his fake captain status, snatches the enchanted paper and rips it into useless shreds. The whole squad stares in paralyzed shock. When they scream at him, this delusional fool smirks proudly, declaring that Oscar is just being a cowardly drama queen. He brushes it off, bragging that they just accidentally triggered some leftover teleportation circle the Academy neglected to scrap. He insists this kind of mishap happens all the time, though Oscar isn't buying a single word of his nonsense. Still, Levin hypes up the squad, swearing this is their golden ticket to make a massive name for themselves. The arrogant guy is banking on clearing this rogue trial to rack up some serious clout and score top-tier grades. With his ego fully inflated, he seizes command, marching his squad straight toward potential slaughter. His clueless lackeys blindly fall in line, utterly starstruck by his status as the golden boy of the prestigious Aldrich bloodline. Oscar watches this circus in disbelief, while Lily gently pulls him aside, warning him to stick close. Cornered with zero alternatives, he trails behind the group, fully aware they could end up as monster snacks at any second. Mere moments later, Oscar's instincts scream as a ferocious pack of savage beasts erupts from the pitch-black shadows. But instead of trembling in fear, Levin's eyes light up with pure adrenaline. Oscar, meanwhile, feels a knot of tension form in his gut. Yet he immediately braces himself. Truth be told, he's been itching for some brutal hands-on combat experience. Plus, he's got a brand new spell he's dying to test drive, making this the perfect testing ground. But just as Oscar winds up to strike, Levin shoves his way to the front, ordering him to stand down. Smirking like a maniac, he declares he's about to show Oscar how true elites do battle, sneering that this bloodbath is no place for a filthy commoner. Oscar just blinks, totally baffled by what the spoiled brat actually means by noble combat. The second the bloodthirsty monsters lunge forward, Levin whips out his gilded magic wand. With a cocky grin, he smashes the tip into the dirt, channeling a massive earth shield shell spell. The ground rumbles as a colossal boulder rips through the... Using the rock wall to stall for time, Levin barks at his lackeys to unleash hell from behind him. One flunky conjures a vicious wind spear, while the other summons a torrential water spear, coordinating their elemental strikes to bombard the beasts thrashing against Levin's earth. Off to the side, Oscar silently dissects their entire team dynamic. He quickly deduces the strategy Levin turtles up on defense, while the grunts spam offensive artillery from the back line. It finally clicks. This cowardly hide-and-shoot tactic, except Oscar scoffs internally, realizing literally every basic mage fights this way, not just blue bloods. But while Oscar critiques their suddenly, a rogue beast shatters their defensive line. It blows right past a panicking Levin and zeroes in on Lily for the kill. Before the monster can snap its jaws, Oscar flashes into action. He ignites a blazing fire blade and cleaves the beast in half with one savage, life-saving strike. Breathing heavily, Lily gasps out a massive thank you. As the dust settles, they glance over and realize Levin's crew finally managed to scrape. His goons are left huffing and totally drained, while Levin stands there completely untouched, having done nothing but cower behind a basic shield. As night falls, the battered squad sets up a dreary camp deep within the cursed woods. Levin won't shut up, relentlessly trashing Oscar's commoner roots and bragging about how blessed he is to witness elite aristocracy in action. Playing along, Oscar throws him a bone, politely clapping for their little group project defensive strategy. But Levin instantly sulks, visibly offended that Oscar isn't on his knees worshipping his supposedly god-tier noble prowess. What the snobby heir doesn't realize is that Oscar couldn't care less about pathetic team casting. Oscar craves overwhelming solo domination. He wants absolute individual firepower, the kind of devastating magic that completely eclipses the bastard who slaughtered him in his past life. He needs to shatter the limits of the world's elite sorcerers, even the monstrous headmaster himself. And playing it safe in these kiddie pool training sessions won't give him that world break. His intense brooding is cut short when Lily softly walks over, handing him a warm cup of coffee. She shyly expresses her gratitude again, feeling embarrassed since she was the one strictly assigned to act as his bodyguard. Oscar waves off her apology with a warm smile, quickly pivoting the conversation to the spells she threw during the chaos. He probes her brain, eager to uncover why some of her magical blasts hit like a truck, while others barely felt like a gentle breeze. Eavesdropping as usual, Levin aggressively butts into the chat, smugly lecturing them that spells naturally pack a heavier punch the closer they explode to the caster. Lily snaps at the arrogant noble to back off, glaring daggers as she reminds him the question was directed at. Levin takes a step back, but he just cannot resist spitting his trademark, filthy commoner, insult at Oscar before shutting up. With the distraction handled, Lily turns her attention back to Oscar, breaking down the complex She details how a spell basically dissolves the second it leaves the caster's body, scattering back into nature as raw mana. A massive light bulb goes off in Oscar's head as he finally understands why projected magic literally vanishes into thin. True to form, the gears in his genius brain start turning rapidly, formulating a brand new magical hypothesis. Knowing that spell circles trigger only when flooded with the exact right amount of mana, he ponders a game-changing question. Could a spell's raw, destructive power... Suddenly his intense focus shatters when Lily groans about brewing her cup of coffee way too thick and heavy. He drops his gaze into his own dark mug, the concept of density sparking a revolutionary idea in his mind, completely tuning out Lily's frantic waves to get his attention. His mind is already miles away, obsessing over how to hypercharge a spell's impact until the ultimate realization hits him. This mechanic is exactly like harnessing sword ki. Deep within the shadows of the forest, Professor Eamon spies on the oblivious squad through a glowing viewing sphere, confirming that he was the mastermind behind this deadly setup all along. A dark smirk crosses his face. He is genuinely surprised. After all, the Aldrich bloodline is notorious across the realm for being an absolute nightmare to eradicate. Viewing the young lord as a massive thorn in his side, Eamon decides to crank the lethality up to 11 to wipe Levin off the board permanently. Meanwhile, back at the secure base camp, Professor Ruth keeps a watchful eye over the exhausted freshmen, settling in for the night. The traumatized kids huddle tightly around the roaring fires, shivering from the cold. While they're reflecting on the brutal trials they face today, she feels a swell of pride, seeing how few students actually tapped out. It totally backs up her gut feeling. This year's rookie class is packed with absolute monsters. Minutes later, the legendary Isabel steps into the firelight for guard duty, and Ruth sighs in massive relief. Instant whispers and awestruck gasps ripple through the student crowd the second they spot the famed powerhouse. Swiping open a holographic tracking circle, she scans the survival stats of the other squads. Knowing Isabel, she utterly despises playing babysitter to a bunch of whiny, weak novices. Yet against all odds, Class 1 is completely Take Zazan, for instance. The guy has basically been sleepwalking through this hellish boot camp. And then there is the mysterious silver-haired girl effortlessly surviving while her eyes stay glued to her thick novel. But the momentary peace shatters when Isabel's sharp eyes catch a glaring red flag. Oscar's team is completely off the radar. Ruth quickly explains that their designated tracking signal has been glitching out for hours, leaving them totally blind to the squad's location. She suggests pinging Professor Eamon for a status check, but as Ruth sweeps the camp, a chilling realization hits. The shady professor has vanished without a trace. Miles away in the eerie ruins of the 5th graveyard, the exhausted squad finally collapses to rest, leaving one guy on high alert. Everyone is dead tired, except for Oscar, who is hopelessly lost in the labyrinth of his own magical equations. He is desperately trying to crack the code on how to manipulate raw mana to mimic the explosive physical boost of a master's sword ki. Knights constantly cycle hypercompress and violently elevate their sword ki from within their very muscles. But right as the final piece of the puzzle clicks, a primal, skin-crawling sense of doom washes over him. The tree line explodes, and their 2 night watchmen burst from the brush, screaming at the top of their lungs for everyone to run for their lives. Levin just scoffs, rolling his eyes as he assumes they are throwing a tantrum over another pack of low-level trash mobs. Striking a dramatic aristocratic battle stance, he prepares to flex until a blinding tsunami of scorching fire rains down from the sky, freezing the blood in their veins. The arrogant noble literally contemplates his life choices in pure horror, while Lily stares upward, paralyzed by the massive swirling through the deafening roar of the flames. An earth-shattering silence follows, before an unimaginably colossal dragon tears through the ancient. As the beast's golden eyes lock onto them, the terrifying reality crashes down on the entire squad. They haven't just stepped into a trap, they have walked straight in. Levin stammers in disbelief, screaming internally about how a mythical apex predator crashed a freshman survival test. Slaying a monster of this caliber is not a student drill. It requires a full party of god-tier magic saints. Staring death in the face, Oscar's sharp mind makes the final, chilling deduction. An unseen enemy is actively trying to massacre them. Panicking, a teammate screams at Levin to fire off their magical distress flare, only for the noble to grimly confess he ripped the damn thing to shreds an eternity ago. With their only lifeline gone and their backs against a fiery wall, Oscar draws his weapon, deadpanning the craziest idea yet. Lily's jaw practically hits the floor. She stares at him like he has lost his mind, completely dumbfounded by such a suicide. But Oscar locks eyes with her. His voice is dead serious, making it crystal clear that this is their one and only. Hearing this, the rest of the crew instantly breathes a massive. After all, they've got Levin on their side, the supposedly untouchable aristocratic prodigy. They figure they can just turtle up behind his barrier spells and stall until the academy professors swoop in to save the day. But then a suffocating silence drops over the group. Out of nowhere, Levin violently smashes his wand into the dirt. A massive surge of earth magic erupts, sealing him tight inside a heavily armored dirt cocoon. The squad is completely blindsided. His loyal lapdogs, who literally bet their lives on his protection, are left staring in pure shock. From inside his shell, Levin just scoffs. He brutally points out that his pathetic little barrier would shatter like glass against a freaking dragon. With a cold sneer, he declares he is saving his own skin. Left entirely defenseless, his former followers immediately spiral into a full-blown panic attack. Lily, however, swallows her fear and puts her faith in Oscar. She rallies the terrified boys, yelling that their only shot is to follow Oscar's battle plan. Refusing to back down, she charges to the front line. Slamming her hands down, she summons a barrage of razor-sharp stone spikes that the guys cheer, desperately praying her brutal assault took the monster down. But as the dust settles, the giant lizard casually strolls out of the smoke. It doesn't have a single dent on its thick scale. Reality crashes down on them. Unless they pack high-tier destruction magic, they are basically throwing pebbles at a tank. Gritting her teeth, Lily offers herself up as bait. She screams at Oscar to run and signal for backup. But Oscar completely zones her out. His eyes lock onto the beast as gears rapidly turn in his head. Meanwhile, one of the sidekicks blindly fires off random spells, trembling so hard he can barely stand. The other guy just collapses to his knees. His eyes go hollow, totally ready to embrace the Grim Reaper. The dragon unhinges its massive jaws, a terrifying vortex of hellfire brewing deep in its throat. Right at that exact second, Oscar calmly steps up to Lily watches him with wide eyes, her heart pounding, as she wonders what insane trick he is about to. Oscar keenly observes the monster. It is actively draining ambient mana right out of the atmosphere, compressing it to fuel its devastating breath weapon. Standing in the face of absolute doom, Oscar doesn't flinch. Instead, a confident smirk crosses his face. He wants to see how he stacks up against a legendary beast. For centuries, these scaled titans have been feared as walking natural disasters. They are built to suck up infinite natural energy to unleash catastrophic destruction. But watching this process sparks a wild idea. Oscar's genius brain instantly pieces together a groundbreaking new magical theory. What if he sucks in the surrounding energy, purifies it, and condenses it with the exact same mechanic the dragon uses for its attack? Behind him, the rest of the squad squeezes their eyes shut, fully preparing to get wiped. Levin shivers violently inside his dirt bunker, selfishly praying he is the only one walking away from this bloodbath. Lily is absolutely terrified that Oscar is about to be incinerated. Yet he stands his ground, cool as a cucumber. A colossal wave of blazing inferno shoots straight at his face. Without missing a beat, Oscar blasts an ultra-condensed fire bullet right back at it. Miraculously, his projectile completely tears through the fiery tsunami. The bullet doesn't just stop the attack. It drills a massive hole right through the beast's skull, instantly Lily is left utterly shell-shocked. Her legs give out and she collapses to the dirt, staring at Oscar like he is an actual god. Miles away, the sinister Eamon observes this entire blood-pumping spectacle through his enchanted looking glass. His jaw hits the floor. He cannot wrap his head around how a measly first-year student casually one-tapped a freaking Before he can even begin to analyze Oscar's absurd cheat skills, Amon detects someone snooping around his location. He quickly cuts the feed. But right before pulling the plug, he violently vows to put Oscar 6 feet under. In his twisted, elitist mind, absolute power belongs strictly to the pure-blooded aristocrats. To him, Oscar is nothing but filthy peasant trash. Back on the battlefield, Oscar just brushes off his shoulders. He is super hyped that his crazy hypothesis actually paid off. He essentially took his past life's sword aura breathing techniques and applied them directly to modern mana control. The result was absolutely flawed. Deep down, he knows this insane stunt was only pulled off because of his past life experience as a legendary blade master. A few seconds pass, and the trembling lackeys slowly creep up to the giant carcass to confirm the beast has actually... Their brains are still short-circuiting over the fact that they aren't piles of ash. Meanwhile, Levin finally cracks open his cowardly dirt shield. The arrogant noble is completely paralyzed with shock. A lowly commoner it utterly shatters his massive ego, realizing that a high-class aristocrat like himself... Lily stands paralyzed, her mind scrambling to process the sheer madness she just witnessed. Without warning, Oscar's legs buckle beneath him, and Lily instantly sprints to his side, panic gripping her chest. But Oscar flashes a weak smile, brushing it off as pure unleashing that monstrous spell had completely siphoned every ounce of his mana. His veins felt like they were coursing with liquid fire, his entire body trembling on the verge of detonating. Seconds later, the crew's blood runs cold as a heavy, ominous rustling echoes from the dark woods. Lily braces for another savage beast, but heaves a massive sigh of relief when Isabel bursts through the tree line alongside her towering stone golem. She had tracked the residual mana from a rogue teleportation circle straight to their location, and frantically checks to see if they are unharmed. But the traumatized students are completely speechless, still frozen. Oscar weakly calls out her name before his eyes roll back, plunging into... As the panicked squad swarms his unconscious body, Isabel's gaze locks onto the massive, slaughtered dragon. A sharp gasp escapes her lips. Her prodigy student had just pulled off the impossible, yet again. She mentally prepares to interrogate every single one of them the second they step foot back at the academy. While everyone else is busy fussing over, Oscar Levin is sweating bullets, absolutely dreading the crushing humiliation waiting for him back at school. As the golden sunset bleeds across the sky, the exhausted squad heads home. Days later, a fully recovered Oscar sits down with Headmaster Balsamus to spill the shocking details of their survival. Balsamus is absolutely floored, struggling to process that an assassination attempt happened right inside the academy's borders. A chilling realization hits him. He praises the young mage for surviving such a brutal ambush, but Oscar looks him dead in the eye, stating he only survived because he made a desperate vow to shatter his own limits. With burning passion, he reveals that he has finally unlocked the very first secret to acquiring true, unstoppable power. However, Balsamus shuts him down, sternly urging the boy to pack his bags and vanish. He warns that these deranged extremists have completely compromised their security, turning the school into a lethal trap. The headmaster begs him to disappear into the mundane world and abandon magic forever, to live a peaceful, normal life. He fiercely insists that walking away is the absolute only guarantee that Oscar will live to see. Those words strike a deep nerve, forcing Oscar to flash back to his miserable past life, where endless success brought him absolutely zero joy. Balsamus softly adds that millions of ordinary folks live beautifully fulfilling lives without casting a single spell. He promises the boy that true happiness does not require wielding mana. He desperately pleads with Oscar not to throw his bright, youthful life away in a suicidal war. But as the old man speaks, Oscar's mind drifts to the pure, electrifying thrill of casting spells under Isabel's guidance. Refusing to surrender his one true passion, he looks the headmaster squarely in the eye. He firmly declares that he did not claw his way through hell just to tuck his tail and run away now. Balsamus sits there, utterly speechless at the boy's iron will, and since his mind is made up, Oscar respectfully thanks the old man for caring. Since the traitor is lurking right under their noses, Oscar leans in, revealing he has a wild strategy to flush the rat out. Instantly hooked, Balsamus narrows his eyes and demands to hear every... With a fearless smirk, Oscar announces he is going to serve himself up on a silver platter as bait, dragging the assassins out into the blinding light. Balsamus gasps in horror, demanding to know if the crazy kid has completely lost his fear of death. Oscar just chuckles confidently, stating he has absolutely zero plans of meeting the Grim Reaper today. That raw, cocky attitude shatters the tension, sending Balsamus into a roaring fit of laughter, like Oscar just dropped a Kevin Hart-level punchline. Oscar blinks in confusion, wondering what the heck triggered the old geezer's laughing fit. But catching the boy's bewildered expression, the headmaster quickly clears his throat and apologizes. Seeing the unbreakable fire in the kid's eyes, Balsamus finally caves and vows to back his insane play. They lock hands in a firm, powerful grip, sealing their highly dangerous secret alliance. As they wrap up, Balsamus casually mentions that Oscar desperately needs to buy a new magic wand. Oscar gives him a confused look, but the moment he inspects his trusty weapon, he realizes the wood is completely shattered and charred beyond repair. Later that day, Oscar tracks down Isabel, who tosses him a temporary catalyst until he can shop for a real upgrade. She hands over yet another cheap, entry-level stick for the time being. Staring at the flimsy wood, Oscar tilts his head and asks the golden question. Does a true mage actually need? Isabel points out how incredibly frustrating it is to write using just bare hands. To drive her point home, she plunges her finger straight into a pot of dark ink. She breaks it down. Think of a wand as a finely tuned pen, while raw mana serves as the ink. Sure, you could theoretically trace out complex spell circles empty-handed, but the resulting magic would turn out completely distorted. She emphasizes that weaving flawlessly stunning spells absolutely demands a serious investment in high-quality gear. Wrapping up their insightful chat, Oscar hits the streets, determined to hunt down his very own magic staff. Lingering by the academy gates, he glares down at his shattered, worn-out stick, utterly baffled that it completely snapped after just a single He figures the flimsy material simply couldn't handle the massive surge of explosive energy he channeled back when he threw down with that feat. But before he can fully unravel that mystery, Lily's cheerful voice completely snaps him back to reality. She quickly apologizes for the holdup, while Oscar feels bad for dragging her out on a shopping trip during her precious day off. Waving off his guilt, Lily flashes a warm smile, insisting it is no big deal, since she actually needed to pick up. Spirits high, the duo strides into the bustling district, ready to track down the ultimate magical weapon. Moments later, they step into their first boutique, leaving Oscar completely mesmerized by the dazzling sea of mystical weaponry on display. The smug owner immediately puffs out his chest, bragging endlessly about his top-tier merchandise. With a dramatic flourish, he reveals an obscenely pricey artifact, absolutely dripping with glittering gemstones. The salesman smoothly promises that wielding this flashy piece will instantly command absolute respect from anyone who sees it. Intrigued, Oscar questions whether all those shiny rocks actually boost spellcasting power or trigger hidden effects. But Lily discreetly nudges his ribs, whispering a subtle warning to peek at the price tag before getting too attached. Oscar's eyes bulge out of his skull as he registers the astronomical number attached. Seeing his massive shock, Lily smoothly suggests they bounce to another spot, politely dodging the outrageously inflated. Yet the very next boutique turns out to be even more notoriously overpriced, forcing the pair to make a swift, desperate escape. After sprinting away from several more luxurious boutiques, the exhausted duo throws their hands up in absolute defeat. Tramping through the streets all afternoon hits Oscar with a harsh reality check. Quality gear costs a total fortune, and his wallet is embarrassingly light. Lily breaks down the harsh truth, revealing that prices are jacked up simply because the vast majority of magic users hail from filthy rich, and those high society elites care way more about flexing their immense wealth. And feeling utterly defeated, Oscar apologizes for wasting her afternoon, suggesting he should probably just tackle the rest of this grueling hunt alone. But Lily stubbornly plants her feet, fiercely promising to stick by his side until they secure the absolute perfect match. Pushing forward through the back alleys, Oscar's gaze suddenly catches on a deeply run-down, heavily weathered workshop. Out of nowhere, a neighboring merchant frantically waves them down, aggressively warning the teens to steer completely. When asked for a reason, the frantic guy claims the owner is an absolute lunatic who viciously bullies innocent shoppers into buying useless junk they deeply hate. Oscar quietly sizes up the shady establishment, and throwing caution straight to the wind, he boldly decides to explore it anyway. Panic flashes in Lily's eyes as she tries to yank him back desperately, warning him that they might end up trapped inside unless they cough up some serious coin. Ignoring her frantic pleas, the fearless swordsman pushes the heavy door open, casually noting that the place looks completely abandoned anyway. So he figures it must be totally legit, Stepping across the threshold plunges them into a suffocating, dimly lit cavern that instantly sends terrifying shivers rocketing down Lily's spine. Through the thick gloom, they spot an intense craftsman named Rod, violently whittling away at some wood. Without even glancing up, the grumpy man gruffly demands whether they are here to window shop or drop coal. Oscar confidently declares he is in the market for a fresh weapon. Hearing this, Rod's heavy carving tools instantly clatter to the dusty floor. The rugged crafter snarls, demanding to know why on earth they bypassed all the fancy boutiques to crawl into his dump. He finally turns around, shooting them a murderous glare, while tightly. Despite the wildly intimidating aura, Oscar doesn't even flinch. Following a tense, suffocating staring contest, Rod's attitude violently erupts, screaming that they are mocking his life's work. The furious craftsman viciously hurls the heavy dagger straight at Oscar's face. With lightning reflexes, Oscar casually tilts his head, letting the deadly steel bury itself into the wall behind him. Unbothered Oscar firmly states he is absolutely dead serious about buying. But this only pours gasoline on Rod's raging fire, prompting the maker to viciously roar that he refuses to serve brute. The sharp deduction catches Oscar completely off guard, while a terrified Lily, now utterly convinced this guy is dangerously unhinged, frantically tugs, but shaking her off, a massive excited grin spreads across Oscar's face. He boldly announces he is staying right put, because he finds this crazy old. Lily stares at him in sheer disbelief, utterly horrified that her friend genuinely wants to buy a crucial weapon from this terrifying, unhinged madman. Even the hostile shop owner who totally expected to chase them. Leaning in closer, Oscar directly challenges the grumpy craftsman. Curiously, Rod's piercing gaze sweeps over Oscar, analyzing the young man, from the crown of his head down to his boots. Breaking the tense silence, the merchant points out a subtle lean in Oscar's posture, a slight shift to the right, compensating for a heavy weight constantly strapped to his left hip. That dead giveaway, Rod smirks, is the unmistakable stance of a seasoned blade wielder. Oscar's eyes widen, completely blown away by the shopkeeper's razor-sharp deduction. Lily immediately steps up, fiercely arguing that her friend doesn't use a blade, but Oscar gently raises a palm, cutting off her defense. A quiet chuckle escapes his lips. He finds it utterly stunning that this stranger read him like an open book in mere seconds. Letting the heavy atmosphere settle, the young man confesses that Rod's jaw practically hits the floor when he discovers the kid has only been casting spells for a mere 6 months. Shrugging off the shock, Oscar reveals the dark truth his father relentlessly pounded the way. Those brutal training sessions branded muscle memory deep into his bones, leaving physical echoes that absolutely refuse to fade away. Lily nods, vigorously swearing up and down that Oscar is a legitimate spellcaster at her very own magic academy. Pivoting the conversation, Rod demands to know why a fresh focus is needed, prompting Oscar to admit his previous gear was completely. Pulling out the charred, splintered remains of his old weapon, he hands it over. Rod inspects the tragic wreckage and bluntly declares it beyond salvation. Squinting at the damaged core, the veteran merchant reveals that the intricate runic matrix buried inside has violently ruptured. The diagnosis is brutally simple. An overwhelming, explosive surge of raw arc. Seeing the blank, confused stare on the boy's face, Rod sighs and simplifies the complicated arc. Massive staves and heavy catalysts, he notes, can absorb colossal oceans of power, but wielding them in combat feels like swinging a massive tree trunk. Plus, channeling energy through those bulky weapons demands absolute razor-thin precision, cranking the difficulty level through the roof. Rod continues his lecture, noting that these basic stripped-down wands are the ultimate training wheels for rookies, which guarantees effortless and swift maneuverability. Shifting gears, he reminds Oscar that the elite faculty members reigning over the Magic Academy lug around enormous, wildly complex staves, because their monstrous magical reservoirs demand a much. Hearing Rod break it down, Oscar is absolutely mind-blown. His cutting-edge magic theory literally fried that basic starter wand. Without missing a beat, he challenges the old craftsman to point out a staff that can actually handle his insane power. But Rod just crosses his arms. That drops a massive bomb on Oscar and Lily. They honestly thought the grumpy shopkeeper had finally thawed out. Pointing a weathered finger at his massive display, Rod issues a test. Find the absolute masterpiece in the room. If the boy's eye is sharp enough, They have a deal. Oscar's eyes lock onto the massive collection sweeping over the shelves, while Lily practically stops breathing, her stomach ties in knots. She knows the golden rule of magical gear size, and ultra-rare materials equal skyrocketing value. Exotic components guarantee a flawless mana flow, slapping an insane price tag on the truly elite weapons. Suddenly, a gleaming staff resting on the highest shelf snags Lily's gaze. Her eyes widen as she scrutinizes the breathtaking craftsmanship. It hits her. That flawless timber, selling that single piece could easily fund a wildly lavish lifestyle for an entire year. She desperately sends telepathic pleas for Oscar to look up, but her silent screams bounce right off him, because in true Oscar fashion, he ignores the shiny stuff. His gaze completely locks onto the absolute drabbest, most ordinary-looking stick in the entire joint. Snatching it up, he whips it through the air like he just struck pure gold, boldly announcing, "It is the one." Lily is instantly paralyzed with shock, and even Rod looks utterly floored. Panicking, Lily frantically gestures toward the ultra-expensive masterpiece up top, desperately begging him to reconsider. But Oscar just shrugs her off. The challenge was to find a truly great weapon, not a flashy price tag. Lily's brain short-circuits completely, clueless as to what he sees in that trashy stick. Breaking the silence, Rod demands to know what drove that specific choice. Oscar flashes a grin, claiming the staff just gave off a deeply comforting, warm vibe. Rod snorts, calling it a battered, worthless piece of junk. But Oscar quickly fires back, highlighting its rock-solid, unbroken core. Age does not matter, he insists. Out in the blood-soaked trenches, a weapon shattering mid-fight is a straight-up death sentence. He traces the rough exterior, proving that despite taking a massive beating, its magical channeling remains absolutely flawless. Moreover, you can feel the crafter's devotion in every curve. It was meticulously carved to protect its wielder at all costs. Those words strike a deep chord. Rod falls dead silent, visibly moved, and slowly turns his back, leaving the duo completely baffled. Just before the old man vanishes into the back, Oscar asks if the deal is sealed, but Rod drops a heavy truth that staff will never. His voice cracks slightly as he confesses he carved it for his own son decades ago. The raw honesty instantly wipes the shock across Oscar and Lily's faces. Blinking back her confusion, Lily saw. With a heavy sigh, Rod delivers a gut punch. It stays there because the boy broke long before the magic ever did. Shutting the emotional door, he refuses to spill another word about his tragic loss. He bitterly brushes it off, claiming the relic is way too ancient to be useful now. Retreating into the shadows of his workshop, the old man isolates himself, prompting Lily to gently tug Oscar toward the exit. She warmly promises to stick by his side, ready to scour every. Oscar lets out a frustrated sigh. Missing out on the gear stings, especially since that grumpy old artisan was undeniably fascinating. But right as their hands hit the door handle, Rod's gruff voice booms through the shop, freezing Oscar right in his tracks. He orders the boy to hold his horses. He is heading to the vault to fetch a staff that actually matches. Electric excitement jolts through the pair. All that intense psychological sparring just scored them a massive win. The second the shopkeeper disappears from sight, Lily dramatically exhales, letting go of all her pent-up stress. Her heart had been hammering against her ribs from the exact second they crossed that terrifying threshold. Flashing a guilty smile, Oscar says sorry for dragging her into his mess, then leans in, hyped to guess what kind of legendary gear is coming their way. But Lily is totally fried. Her adrenaline is completely tapped out, leaving zero room for any more wild surprises today. Still catching the absolute thrill dancing in his eyes, she knows he is eating up every single second of this chaos. Out of absolutely nowhere, Eamon bursts through the entrance. Caught completely off guard, the pair stares back, as Eamon aggressively demands to know what they are doing on his turf. A suffocating, razor-sharp tension chokes the room. Amon's knuckles turn white around. Oscar completely locks eyes with him, radiating a chilling, unblinking intensity, while a blissfully unaware Lily brightly chirps, asking if he is just here shopping for gear. Amon mumbles some shady, half-baked excuse right as Rod strides back into the room, booming out a surprisingly. Giving a stiff nod to the old man, Eamon practically sprints out the front door, peeling out like a bat out of hell. Throwing a quick excuse over his shoulder, he claims he will swing by later, since the shop is packed, and vanishes into the street. Lily sprints outside to catch him, but Amon has already vanished down the street. Panic settles in her chest as she frets about crashing the professor's private meeting with the shopkeeper. Meanwhile, Oscar stands there utterly unfazed and perfectly silent. Moments later, the old man dusts off a battered staff, presenting it to the boy as his destined weapon. The kid's eyes light up like it is Christmas morning, totally ignoring the artifact's busted-up appearance. Lily instantly gasps, identifying the wood as a fragment of the legendary origin tree. This colossal botanical marvel hails from a secluded island, thriving in literally any weather condition. No matter how brutal the elements get, its core refuses to rot, sporting leaves that endlessly glow. It only sheds its branches every few decades, leaving Lily absolutely stunned to see such a priceless artifact sitting right here. After all, everyone knows this ultimate magical conduit is practically impossible to find. Smirking at her textbook knowledge, the shopkeeper reveals that this specific staff can absorb an absolutely insane amount of magical energy. Out of all its fancy perks, that raw power capacity is the only detail that hooks the boy's attention. But right before he can pump his fists, his friend brings him back to reality, reminding him how they literally had to flee multiple stores. Why? Because their pockets are practically empty. Hearing that, the kid's massive grin instantly gets wiped from his face. Even so, the old man shoves the weapon into his grip, bluntly stating that he refuses to accept a single dime. His voice softens as he confesses he forged it specifically for his own child. It was supposed to be a welcome home present, but his boy died out there on the gruesome battlefield. Treating it like delicate glass, the student gently grips the handle as the grieving father steps back behind the counter. Waving off their stunned silence, the shop owner doubles down on giving it away completely free of charge. He makes it crystal clear that he absolutely will not sell any other item to the boy. Simply put, nothing else on these shelves could possibly handle the kid's aura. Taking the hint, the boy clutches his new treasure, and he bows his head, expressing his deepest gratitude for the priceless heirloom. Brushing off the emotional moment, the gruff man commands him to actually channel some power into the wood. Shutting his eyes tight, the student pushes his raw energy straight into the core, while the craftsman watches like a hawk. Suddenly, a bizarre spark courses through his veins as his magic intertwines with the ancient artifact. Even though he literally just touched it, the weapon responds exactly like an old trusted friend. The second the connection stabilizes, the old man yells at the duo to get the heck out of his shop. He grumbles something about needing to clear out space so real paying customers. Pausing at the door, the kid throws out one last question, asking if that intense professor swings by here often. Fast forward a few days, and the entire classroom is locked onto the duo, loudly whispering about their chaotic survival. The academy had officially covered up the 5th graveyard disaster, blaming the whole nightmare on a glitched travel portal. Honestly, the students are completely mind-blown that the squad actually made it back alive. They mercilessly drag Levin through the mud, mocking him for crying like a massive baby during the crisis. Out of nowhere, a vicious whip crack echoes through the room, instantly silencing the gossipers as the terrifying teacher steps in. He furiously rips into the teens for disrespecting him and running their mouths, forcing the trembling kids to aggressively apologize. But through all the screaming, our protagonist just intensely glares right back at his mind. Flashes back to the shopkeeper's confession, revealing that this exact teacher led his dead kids. Turns out the strict professor watched the boy take his last breath, taking it upon himself to deliver the crushing news to the father. Honoring the fallen soldier, he hauled the kid's beaten-up staff all the way back as a final keepsake. Hearing that tragic backstory practically brought the girl to tears. The old man even defended the grumpy teacher, praising him for treating a peasant soldier with massive respect despite his own high-class noble status. But that detail made the kid's brain click, boldly pointing out that the fallen soldier must have possessed mind-blowing magical talent. Because looking closely at the original staff, the sheer amount of battle damage, that deduction left the father totally paralyzed, completely floored that a random student instantly realized his boy was a combat genius. Rod's chilling confession finally clicked the missing puzzle pieces into place for Oscar. He instantly connected the dots. Professor Amon oversaw the deadly field training, placing him right at the absolute top of the suspect list. Sifting through the clues, a dark realization washed over him. Amon wasn't just a suspect. He was the mastermind pulling the strings behind the brutal assassination attempt. Ice flowed through Oscar's veins. Since the traitor had absolutely no idea his cover was blown, our boy decided to flip the script and strike first. Deep in the shadows, Amon activated a glowing communication circle, dialing into his sinister syndicate. A raspy, bone-chilling voice crackled through the magic, pouring twisted praise onto the professor for his blood-soaked success on the battlefield. The mysterious figure lauded his ruthless efficiency, thrilled that he had violently smashed right through their dark expectations. But the praise came with a razor-sharp warning. They demanded that exact same lethal perfection inside the walls of the Magic Academy. Sweat beaded on Amon's forehead. Swallowing his rising panic, he stamped. The gravelly voice immediately caught that split second of fear, mockingly questioning if a simple school job was somehow tougher than a literal war zone. Panicking, the professor furiously denied it, only to be slapped with a terrifying deadline. The syndicate wanted blood, and they wanted it fast. As the glowing runes faded into darkness, Amon stood totally frozen, a heavy knot of pure dread twisting inside his gut. Meanwhile, back at the grand office, Oscar confidently laid all his damning cards. Headmaster Balsamos's jaw practically hit the floor. Hearing Amon's name tied to the brutal ambush felt like he fiercely denied it at first. To the world, Amon was a decorated war hero, a legendary savior who routinely bled for his comrades. Unfazed Oscar acknowledged the man's shiny medals, but his eyes stayed dead serious. The hero was a fake, and Oscar knew it down to his bones. Catching the sheer, unshakable fire in the young mage's eyes, the old man finally caved, choosing to trust his student's insane theory. But Balsamos dropped a heavy truth bomb. A dangerous smirk crept onto Oscar's face as he smoothly declared that he would become. The headmaster blinked in pure confusion, prompting the boy to lay out his reckless master plan. He would lure the killer out into the open, just like back in the forest. His strategy was brutally simple. Isolate himself from the pack, strip away all witnesses, and dangle a juicy target right in front of the assassin. He knew exactly how the traitor's mind worked. Faced with a wide-open shot, Amon would while chewing over this borderline suicidal tactic, the headmaster's gaze drifted down to a crisp, urgent parchment resting. It detailed an elite VIP escort request for the Imperial Princess herself. A secluded, high-stakes journey, the absolute perfect stage for Oscar's deadly ambush. Word on the street was that Princess Ariel was actually slated to join their ultra-elite first-year lineup. But a violent magical backlash, a curse wrapped inside her ancient royal bloodline, had violently derailed her grand entrance. Later that day, Professor Ruth stood before the hushed classroom, laying out the gritty details of the royal's tragic predicament. He quickly dropped the hammer, announcing a high-profile rescue op. A hand-picked strike team was heading straight for the bustling heart of the Empire to play royal bodyguards. Ruth didn't mess around plucking only the absolute heavy hitters from their top-tier roster for this delicate job. The dream team. Oscar, the incredibly loud-mouthed Zazen, and that silent library girl, who practically glued her eyeballs. Internally, Oscar was throwing a literal party. This remote field trip was the flawless golden ticket to bait out his would-be killer. The professor wrapped up the mission briefing and opened the floor, instantly prompting Zazen's hand to shoot up like a rocket. Because some things never change. The arrogant noble immediately locked his crosshairs onto his favorite punching bag, our underdog hero. Dripping with total condescension, Zazen publicly challenged the teacher, questioning if the snob's smug grin shattered when Ruth fired back. Not only did Oscar belong there, but the professor bluntly declared that his power completely eclipsed everyone else's. The teacher proudly pointed to the boy's jaw-dropping survival run. Zazen's brain essentially short-circuited in pure, unadulterated shock, while the quiet bookworm barely twitched a muscle. Blinded by his own raging ego, the noble stubbornly rejected the cold, hard facts handed right to him. He loudly mocked our boy, branding him a pathetic, bottom-tier apprentice who couldn't even spark a basic mana flicker if his... Through the entire whiny tantrum, Oscar sat there like a stone wall, letting the salty, rich kid absolutely scream into the void. The noble was practically frothing at the mouth, furiously ranting about how everyone from elite Isabel to the freaking headmaster, and now Ruth, was blindly worshipping this talentless hack. The recent combat scores had completely bruised his fragile pride, and there was zero chance he was swallowing a massive loss to boiling over with toxic jealousy. Zazen slammed his hand down and aggressively demanded a full-blown duel. He snarled right at Oscar's face, daring the silent powerhouse to act. Oscar completely freezes at the sudden call-out, seeing as he was just trying to lay low and mind his own damn business. Ruth grits her teeth, furious that this royal escort mission could crumble before it even starts, just because these spoiled brats cannot check their massive egos, desperate to salvage whatever team cohesion they have left. Ruth greenlights the clash, dropping a massive bombshell. Whoever eats dirt in this arena gets permanently booted from the royal squad. Zazen immediately bites, flashing an arrogant smirk, while Oscar just hovers awkwardly in the background, like a glorified extra. Before his brain can even process the absolute absurdity of the situation, Oscar is shoved right into the combat zone for a massive fight he never signed up for. Gripping his wooden staff, Oscar stares blankly ahead, desperately trying to trace back how his life spiraled into this chaotic mess. While our guy is having a full-blown existential crisis, Zazen practically vibrates with excitement, utterly desperate to flex his high-class nobility. The split second his wand slices the air, Zazen chants a lethal incantation. He violently barks at the commoner to brace himself for an absolute slaughter. Meanwhile, Oscar finally snaps out of his daze, realizing he has to crush this obstacle right here, right now, since he still has way bigger targets on his radar. Plus, taking a loss simply is not on the table. His entire master plan hinges on using this escort gig to lure Aimon right into his trap. Locking his resolve, Oscar's eyes narrow as he officially steps up to Zazen's brutal challenge. See, despite being showered with endless praise as the flawless prodigy of the prestigious Galochi's bloodline, Zazen secretly drowns in a crushing inferiority complex. He is an extreme perfectionist, constantly agonizing over his own perceived flaws. No matter how loudly the crowds cheer his name, the guy just cannot accept his own raw power. Rumor has it that among all the aristocratic frost mages, the Galochi's family, yet standing next to his impossibly flawless older brother Zazen, just feels like garbage. Growing up entirely stripped of natural magical gifts, he brutally grinded, day and night, shedding blood and sweat, just to meet the suffocating standards of his elite household, all in a desperate scramble to even grade. Deep down, Zazen only picked this fight with Oscar to validate his own worth, desperately clawing for the right to proudly wear the Galochi's crest. Back in the ring, Zazen unleashes a relentless barrage of heavy frost spears, but Oscar weaves through the icy projectiles like an absolute phantom. Smirking at the commoner's quick footwork, the noble decides it is time to stop playing nice and cranks up the heat. He casts a devastating deep freeze spell, instantly locking Oscar's boots to the arena floor in a solid block of unyielding ice. Frost rapidly creeps up Oscar's arm and engulfs his weapon, but he stays completely cool, erupting a sudden burst of scorching flames to shatter his ice. Zazen's jaw practically hits the floor at the sight of his high-tier magic melting in mere seconds. The arena goes dead silent as the two lock eyes in a tense, nerve-wracking standoff. From the sidelines, Ruth critically analyzes the showdown, while the quiet bookworm girl just chills in the corner, thoroughly bored by this massive display of toxic male ego. As the intense brawl pushes on, Ruth cannot hide her utter fascination at how perfectly Oscar weaponized that fire barrier to obliterate the frost trap. She sharply notes that his fluid, zero-waste footwork screams of a seasoned veteran who has survived countless life-or-death battlefields. Even so, her combat intuition tells her that the nobleman's raw mana pool still massively dwarfs whatever Oscar is packing. It is just a ticking clock before Zazen's overwhelming brute force crushes the commoner. And perfectly on cue, a deadly ring of floating ice lances boxes Oscar in. Thinking he has already secured the flawless victory, Zazen flashes a highly arrogant smirk, tossing out a backhanded compliment about Oscar's decent survival. But in the noble's mind, a little street smarts means absolutely nothing against his decades of brutal, high-class magical conditioning. Channeling another massive wave of chilling magical energy, Zazen preps his ultimate execution strike to cement his absolute dominance once and for all. But then the atmosphere drastically shifts, an anomaly so wild it actually forces the introverted bookworm to completely abandon her precious reading. Ruth's eyes widen in pure disbelief as Oscar slowly straightens up, radiating an incredibly dense aura of blinding mana. Oscar casually brushes off his shoulders, lazily apologizing for the delay, acting as if he was just stretching his muscles this entire time. He blatantly admits he was dragging out the fight just to charge up, leaving the aristocratic prodigy completely stunned and rattled. Flashing a highly confident grin, Oscar warns the noble that it is his turn to strike. But Zazen furiously barks back that the curtain has already closed on this little act. Pushing his magic to the absolute limit, Zazen triggers his ultimate trump card, a colossal, inescapable glacial tomb, meant to... The ambush actually catches our boy off guard, slipping right past his radar in a total blindside maneuver. Oscar quickly pieces it together. The sneaky noble had completely camouflaged this delayed trap inside his previous barrage of frozen. Yet Oscar does not even flinch, his heartbeat completely steady, now that his intense mana compression is finally at 100%. At this ridiculous power level, Zazen's flashy little freezer box is nothing more than a pathetic children's toy. Clenching his upgraded staff, he knows damn well this weapon can effortlessly shrug off the exact... Just as Zazen attempts to lock him inside a freezing frost cage, Oscar unleashes his blazing fireblade spell. With one devastating swing, he shatters the icy containment. Zazen's eyes widen in absolute disbelief. Completely paralyzed by the fact, Ruth stands there absolutely speechless, while even the quiet bookworm girl finally looks up, captivated by the intense. Meanwhile, Oscar is riding a massive adrenaline rush, thrilled that his magical execution is aligning perfectly with his vision. The surging magical energy leaves him feeling weightless, allowing his incantations to materialize flawlessly, without a single microsecond of delay. While Oscar is having the absolute time of his life, Zazen is spiraling into a living nightmare as the searing flames violently melt through his magical barriers. His mind just cannot process how a mere commoner managed to obliterate his elite defensive ward with such effortless. Right as he opens his mouth to spit his usual insults, Oscar begins taking slow, menacing steps toward him. Watching the blazing mage close the gap, a sudden wave of nostalgia hits Zazen, dragging his memories back to his older brother. In his younger days, his only driving ambition was to mirror his siblings' overwhelming greatness. But his brother always brushed off the praise, firmly believing that Zazen had placed him on a totally unearned pedestal. He never once viewed himself as a prodigy. He constantly warned that the world was crawling with hidden monsters, who could easily make his... Looking up at the towering presence of Oscar standing right in front of him, the chilling truth of his brother's warning finally clicks in Zazen's head. Oscar finally bridges the gap, but the exact split second he raises his staff for the finishing blow, Ruth loudly blows the whistle on the spar. Stepping in to freeze the combat, she firmly announces that the victor of this bout has already been crystal clear. Defeated Zazen drops his guard in total silence, his eyes glued to the smoldering... Cut to another dorm where Levin is violently trashing his room, completely spiraling into a total existential crisis after that disastrous field exercise. News of his pathetic, cowardly behavior has infected the entire academy. Absolutely sick and tired of the endless death glares from his peers, he foolishly points all the blame for his shattered reputation straight at Oscar. A sharp rapping at his door snaps him out of his blind rage. Ripping the handle open, he starts screaming his head off at whoever dared to interrupt him. But the furious words instantly die in his throat the moment he realizes Professor Amon is the one standing on the other side. Fast forward to the very next morning. Zazen strides into the lecture hall, instantly locking eyes with Oscar in a heavy, lingering stare down. Following their intense clash, Zazen had openly confessed his bitter jealousy, struggling to swallow the harsh reality that a lifetime of grind... When the victor had graciously extended a hand to pull him up from the dirt, the defeated noble aggressively slapped it away. With fire in his eyes, he boldly swore an oath to... While the commoner gladly accepted the rivalry, he silently resolved to grind relentlessly until his so-called gifted abilities reached a godlike, untouchable level. With his golden ticket for the upcoming escort assignment officially locked, and our hero eagerly anticipates his inevitable showdown with the shady Professor Amon tomorrow. Deep into the afternoon lecture, Instructor Ruth drops the news that she will be running a fresh round of magical capacity evaluation. Right on cue, Levin slowly drags himself into the room. He looks chillingly deadpan, rocking fresh, heavy medical wraps entirely. The teacher sharply calls him out for being incredibly tardy, but the disgraced student treats her like an absolute ghost. He zombie walks straight to his desk, completely unbothered by the brutal whispers and venomous snickers echoing from the peanut gallery. His footsteps hitch for just a split second when he catches Oscar's gaze, but he quickly breaks eye contact and silently slides into his chair. Oscar's internal alarm bells immediately start. A couple of minutes later, Ruth barks at the rowdy classroom to zip it so she can officially kick off the energy readings. Once the bell finally rings, Lily practically jumps with joy, showering Oscar with praise for rapidly expanding. He humbly gives all the credit to his newly acquired casting staff, claiming the magical weapon genuinely feels like a natural. Hearing this, the bubbly girl taps her chin, seriously debating if she needs to drop by Rod's arm. Out of nowhere, Levin steps directly into Oscar's path, instantly drawing a crowd of nosy classmates who resume their relentless whispered trash talk. But instead of throwing punches, the disgraced noble looks him dead in the eye and bluntly begs for a mentor, demanding to know the secret. Completely blindsided by this total 180, our hero cautiously asks him to spell out exactly what he... Clicking his tongue in annoyance, Levin violently snaps at him to drop the innocent act, boldly claiming he has already figured out the commoner's hidden cheat code. That bold declaration instantly throws Oscar's guard all the way up, sending his brain into overdrive as he panics over what kind of dirt this guy actually dug up. Fast forward a little bit, and we see our cautious protagonist silently trailing his former bully all the way. He is genuinely taken aback when he realizes the injured student actually pulled strings to rent out the entire facility. Desperate for answers, Oscar demands to know what secret Levin is blabbering about, only for the guy to snap back, accusing him of playing dumb. Levin then spits out a wild claim that the insane power Oscar used to slay the dragon was actually a handout from someone else. At this point, Oscar is utterly lost, trying to wrap his head around this absolute nonsense. Seeing Oscar's blank stare just pours gasoline on Levin's rage, making him think the commoner is mocking him. He bursts into a screaming fit, throwing a massive tantrum about how everyone constantly treats him like a total. Out of nowhere, Levin's bandages rip apart as his flesh bulges his arm, mutating into a grotesque, spike-covered monstrosity. Oscar freezes in pure shock, watching wide-eyed as the guy's limb twists into something straight out of a horror movie. Even Levin looks utterly terrified by his own mutation. Guess the guy forgot to read the fine print before making a shady deal. Oscar immediately tries to assess the situation, but Levin is just as clueless, panicking, as his body acts on its own. Thinking he was getting some god-tier superhero power-up, Levin practically cries that this horrific freak show wasn't part of the bargain. Too bad for him, his cheap knockoff robotic arm doesn't stop transforming, violently shifting while he howls in absolute agony. At that exact second, lethal spikes erupt from the earth, coming inches away from skewering Oscar like a rotisserie chicken. Thankfully, he narrowly backflips out of the danger zone, keeping his eyes locked on the mutating student. Oscar quickly realizes Levin's jerky, unnatural movements look exactly like a puppet dancing on string. Flashing back to Levin's rant about being gifted power, the pieces finally click, and Oscar figures out exactly who is pulling the strings. All the while, Levin just keeps sobbing about how brutally unfair his pathetic life has been. He flat out denies any responsibility. In his twisted mind, ditching his team just to save his own skin wasn't a mistake at all. But then, as if the guilt finally crushes him, Levin breaks down, confessing that deep down, he really did want to protect his squad. If only he wasn't so incredibly weak. Catching Levin completely off guard in his mental breakdown, Oscar lunges forward. Levin blindly swings his grotesque spiked club of an arm, but Oscar effortlessly sidesteps the heavy blow. Before the mutated student can even blink, Oscar strikes the back of his neck, knocking him out cold and carefully lowering him to the dirt. With Levin safe, Oscar furiously barks into the shadows, calling out Eamon for using a clueless kid as a disposable pawn. Knowing full well the bastard is hiding nearby, enjoying the show, Oscar demands the coward step out into the light. Suddenly, a massive murder of crows spirals overhead, parting to reveal Eamon, clutching his signature whip. The arrogant noble immediately sneers, trash-talking Oscar for being a filthy, disrespectful commoner. Amon literally levitates in midair, resting against a phantom rift in the sky, while his dark, feathered pets swarm around him. Dripping with confidence, he casually lays out the fake cover story he plans to feed the Academy once he buries Oscar. His grand master plan. Claim the two boys were sparring when things went horribly wrong, chalking Oscar's death up to a tragic little training accident. Sick of his villain monologue, Oscar cuts him off with a blazing blast of fire magic, but Amon swats the flames away like a minor nuisance. Looking mildly irritated by the cheap trick, Amon glares down at him, swearing he'll force the arrogant commoner to his knees. With a flick of his wrist, he summons a vicious pack of wolf familiars, sending the bloodthirsty beasts charging straight for Oscar. As Oscar frantically dodges snapping jaws, his mind flashes back to a crucial warning from the headmaster. Balsamus had made it perfectly clear. Amon wields a terrifying brand of familiar controlling magic. He literally carves ancient spell formulas into the corpses of monsters, turning them into his personal zombie hit squad. Though luckily, there's a strict limit to how many he can control at once. The headmaster had dropped the ultimate cheat code on how to beat this exact setup. The strategy is simple. Completely ignore the puppet master up in the sky. But Balsamus also warned him not to get cocky, reminding him that a magic saint like Amon is guaranteed to have deadlier tricks hidden up his sleeve. The old man had specifically ordered him never to confront this psycho solo. But right now, Oscar's back is totally against the wall. The original plan was to scheme with the headmaster during their upcoming escort mission, but nobody expected Amon to strike this damn fast. And now that an innocent kid has been twisted into a weapon, Oscar refuses to retreat even a single inch. He fights tooth and nail, pushing himself to the absolute brink. The haunting echoes of Levin's agonizing screams keep ringing in his ears. Fueling his rage with that tragic memory, Oscar grits his teeth and unleashes a devastating inferno, turning the undead wolves into a pile of ash. Looking down at Oscar's murderous glare, Amon chuckles, genuinely amused, as he asks why the boy looks so incredibly pissed off. He condescendingly questions if Oscar is really busting his gut just to avenge some pathetic loser. Oscar admits his burning rage over what happened to Levin, but Amon just throws his head back and cackles. The villain sneers, pointing out that those two are barely even pals, having only partnered up a single time during field drills. Yet for our hero, that brief alliance is more than enough to shoulder the weight of Levin's life. Amon sharply retorts that the feeling wasn't mutual, exposing the dark truth that Levin craved absolute power, just to orchestrate a brutal revenge against Oscar. In Levin's eyes, our protagonist was strictly a target, and a pathetic commoner to boot. Despite this blatant psychological warfare, Oscar refuses to flinch, leaving the villain completely baffled. With ice in his veins, Oscar states that he couldn't care less about Levin's twisted grudges. Powering up for another strike, he declares that his former comrade carved his own tragic path, driven by an endless thirst for dominance. Staring daggers into, Oscar vows he will never forgive Amon for preying on that desperate vulnerability. But just as he channels a blazing inferno, his magical seal violently fractures into dust. Blindsided, he quickly discovers his ability to weave spells has been completely paralyzed. Touching down on the dirt, Amon coldly proclaims his syndicate will systematically erase any gifted peasant from existence. He smirks, boasting about the flawless trap he laid out specifically to counter Oscar's monstrous magical potential. As our hero's spell work continuously fizzles out, the villain conjures a colossal, earth-shaking elephant beast. Scanning the chaotic battlefield, Oscar connects the dots, finally realizing these shadowy creatures have been draining his life force, leeching his mana this entire fight, and actively jamming his arcane signal. Even caught in this deadly snare, Oscar keeps his cool, warning Amon that he didn't walk into this blind. Confident he's locked down every exit, Amon summons a bloodthirsty pack of spectral wolves to close the net. Although this suffocating barrier strips Amon of his own casting abilities, the villain remains wildly arrogant. He gleefully brags, already etched into his monstrous pets, will hunt autonomously without needing fresh incantations. With a sadistic grin, he gives the execution order to send off as the snarling pack of beasts swarms him from every conceivable angle. Outnumbered and cornered, the young maid refusing to panic in the face of absolute doom. Suddenly, the puzzle pieces fall into place, revealing exactly how Eamon butchered so many elite spellcasters with ease. Oscar realizes it was never about raw power, but how the victims were paralyzed by pride and dragged into bottomless despair. Flashing back to the tragic moment he gripped the wand of Rod's mercy, Oscar instinctively clutches his own heart. The agonizing reality sets in regarding how utterly terrifying it felt for that child to be stripped of his magic, surrounded by towering monsters, and left completely helpless. Ignited by sheer righteous fury, Oscar braces for impact, fully prepared to give this arrogant killer a brutal wake-up call for targeting the wrong guy. Cutting over to the headmaster's, Balsamus is interrupted by Ruth, who drops a heavy stack of urgent paperwork on his desk. She presses him, questioning if all this intense security is tied to the current mission. And the headmaster firmly replies that safeguarding the princess's life is their ultimate priority. Flipping through the files, his eyes widen at a massive spike in student petitions, begging to book the combat arenas, way beyond any previous year's records. Ruth beams with pride, praising the relentless dedication burning within the academy's ranks. But then she drops a casual yet chilling detail, revealing that Levin has been taking private one-on-one lessons from Eamon. The second that name leaves her lips, alarm bells violently ring in the headmaster's mind, smashing back to the deadly showdown. Oscar faces the grim reality that while these parasitic beasts roam free, casting fresh spells is completely out of the question. Yet his sharp eyes lock onto a crucial loophole in his enemy's master plan. The summoning grid is still feeding the monsters, meaning there absolutely has to be a back door to trigger a magical sequence. As his mind races to crack the code, a shadowy beast lunges from his blind spot for a lethal ambush. Out of nowhere, the beast ambushes him from the shadows, sinking its claws into his left arm. Eamon smirks, entirely convinced his target is finished. But Oscar refuses to throw in the towel. Shutting his eyes, he channels his raw energy and summons a gigantic blazing projectile. The searing inferno rips straight through the creature, carrying enough momentum to slam right into the colossal Eamon completely loses his mind. Panic flashes across his face as he frantically demands to know how the kid pulled off a spell in such impossible conditions. Dropping an absolute bombshell, Oscar coldly states that he traced the magical circuitry pulsing deep within the beast's core. By keeping the spell contained within the monster's flesh, he completely bypassed the dead zone in the open air. Blood drips heavily from Oscar's mangled limb, yet Eamon ignores the gruesome injury, utterly fixated on this impossible revelation. The idea of actually visualizing the mana flow inside another living being shatters his reality, prompting the frantic noble to interrogate Oscar's methods. The absolute kicker. The boy didn't even draw his catalyst. With an icy glare, Oscar casually drops that he weaves complex spells completely wandless. Cold sweat drenches Eamon's pale face. His pride violently rejects the horrifying truth staring him down. This supposed amateur is a legitimate threat, channeling devastating high-tier destruction using absolutely nothing but his bare fingertips. Shifting his stance to attack, Oscar charges forward. Driven by pure desperation, Eamon refuses to bow out, frantically spamming a barrage of glowing glyphs. It is entirely useless. The desperate onslaught is instantly swallowed and incinerated by Oscar's hyper-concentrated crimson flames. Trembling in sheer terror, the noble watches his ultimate defense melt away like cheap plastic. As an elite veteran spellcaster, his ego shatters. Screaming at the top of his lungs, he accuses the boy of concealing monstrous talent. Still clinging to a shred of hope, he convinces himself that firing off another nuke of that magnitude is physical. But Oscar hits him with a chilling reality check. A second strike won't even be necessary. Squinting through the smoke, Eamon notices a fatal crack running down his precious staff. His catalyst is shattered, rendering him completely defenseless. Paralyzing dread hooks its claws into his chest. Taunting the pathetic noble, Oscar genuinely wonders how many seconds he can survive empty-handed. Stripped of his arrogance, Eamon violently throws himself to the dirt. He grovels on his hands and knees, desperately, tears streaming down his face. He swears he will never cross paths with the boy again, promising to spill every dirty little secret he holds. Grasping at straws, he offers the ultimate bribe, a guaranteed fast-tracked recommendation straight into the prestigious Magic Apprentice tier. It is an absolute golden ticket, that proves Acastra's undeniable. Yet Oscar's expression remains dead flat. Unfazed by the pathetic groveling, he coldly asks if the miserable man is finished yapping. Stepping closer, he promises not to bury him today, simply because he needs this rat to publicly confess to every single one of his atrocious crimes. Snap. Something breaks inside Eamon's mind. Scrambling toward the giant pachyderm, the disgraced noble risks absolute madness just to avoid taste. Spitting pure venom, he screams that he refuses. Slamming his hands down, Eamon triggers a desperate, last-ditch spell. A sinister glyph erupts from the earth, completely swallowing both him. Flesh and bone violently twist together, as the dark ritual forcefully fuses the. Oscar takes a step back, his eyes widening in pure disgust as the grotesque metamorphosis reaches its terrifying climax. In a blink, the mutated abomination launches a frenzied assault. It wildly craters the battlefield, sending massive shockwaves that force Oscar on the defensive. Realizing the noble's humanity is permanently erased, the young mage grits his teeth and gears up to unleash his maximum firepower. But right as he moves in for the final blow, a massive cyclone erupts from thin air. The howling tempest violently shackles the beast. Drifting down from the sky, the headmaster arrives, radiating an absolutely suffocating aura. With a proud smirk, he praises the boy for holding the. Stepping between Oscar and the raging monster, the veteran smoothly tells the kid to